Okay, should be live for the weekly stream. This should be a good one. I am excited about it. We're going to kind of jump around. We're going to look at a bit of a debate. We're going to look at a bit of a discussion, which is the complete opposite of the debate that we're going to look at. And then we're going to talk in general about where science is at on the origin of life. What is the issue with even the stating the origin of life, and how sentient singularity theory can resolve many of the issues that are encountered when discussing the origin of life. So, without further ado, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. It helps get this content out to more people if you think that this is interesting. Join the chat, ask any questions you have. Hello, Paulina. Thank you for joining the chat. So, also, I do believe I turned on super chats, so it should be there if you want to support the channel. It's very appreciated, but the biggest way to support this channel right now is to hit the like button and share the streams. So please do so. Tonight we're going to be discussing a very important issue in science, and one that incorporates many fundamental problems that we discuss a lot on this channel, and that is the origin of life. And there's so many different problems with trying to figure out the origin of life. The main issue is that the statement origin of life is misleading. It's already leading you down the wrong path if you want to actually answer the question that you're trying to answer. So let's say we get rid of language, okay? And we say that you're trying to answer a question, but you don't exactly know how to state the question that you're trying to ask. What you're trying to ask is, where did sentience come from? Where did something that we would identify as and categorize as a living thing come from? Not something that we, not only what we currently categorize as a living thing, but anything that is alive. And even these terms are so incredibly damaging to the discussion itself. But they're also necessary because they've already been created and we have concepts associated with them. So there's so many issues with this. I doubt that, sometimes I doubt that we will really ever make progress on this that is profound, because it does require scrapping so many preconceived notions and assumptions and associations with and terminology that we use. I mean, we have to change not just our approach to answering this question, but also change the question that we're asking, and also change how we look at the terms that we're using to even formulate the question that we're trying to actually answer. And it's not just what is the origin of life. I mean, there's multiple questions that you could try and answer in multiple ways to frame this problem. One of them would be, what is the origin, or what is responsible for the creation or germination or whatever generation of cellular life on Earth? And this is usually what people in the scientific community mean by this question of what is the origin of life. They're defining life as cellular organisms, single cellular organisms, and eventually multicellular organisms. But in the beginning of at least their definition, we're going to say single cellular organisms. And that is a very limited definition for life. it's also incorrect unless you're specifically artificially limiting it to that. In which case, why do you have the term? Why would you define life as that? But so we're trying to figure out the origin of beings. What is responsible for the generation of beings? Okay, not just inanimate things, but animated beings, sentient beings, and that is really a better question. What is the origin of sentience? And that is an issue. It's a problematic question, but it's much closer. It's much less problematic. But anyways, so we're gonna, like I said, look at a debate between James Tour and let me pull this up. Videos. Popular. And Dave Farina, but let me pull up the actual clips. So this is James Tour's YouTube channel, or Jim Tour as people often call him. These are his popular videos. Here are some of his latest videos. This is his debate. This is I guess a debate announcement from 8 days ago with James Tour and Dave Farina. And then he has many different videos on scripture and Christ and religion in general, Christianity, the Bible. But then he has all these videos about how science and religion and God clash. And this is a very interesting, I guess, person to me, because I identify a lot with him in some ways. He is someone who grew up as a secular Jewish person, and that was me. And he is also somebody who has come to, I don't want to say faith for me because it's not faith, but he would probably call it faith, in not just God, but in Jesus as the Son of God, or the Messiah that is described in Scripture. And he is also a scientist. And so let's get into his background. So according to his Wikipedia, as my voice cracks, James Mitchell Tour, born 1959, is an American chemist and nanotechnologist. He is a professor of chemistry, professor of material science and nanoengineering, and professor of computer science at Rice University in Houston, Texas. He is a top researcher in his field, having an H index of 160 with total citations over 125,000, and was listed as an ISI highly cited researcher. Interesting. The H index is an author-level metric that measures both the productivity and citation impact of publications, initially used for an individual scientist or scholar. So basically, how many times is how much do people rely on your contributions in science? It's basically what an H index tries to measure. I'm not saying it does a bad job. I'm just saying that is the intention. But let me know the stream, how the stream is doing in the chat. Comment any questions you may have. And like I said, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. We are definitely against the grain on this channel and the mainstream, I guess, flow of information, because it's so long form, and because it is very often just live. And I'm trying to figure out a way to just inject us into the conversation more and more, as which I think we've definitely been doing. But it is very helpful to, like the videos. But here. Then we have the person who he had a debate with, which is Dave Farina. And Dave Farina, on Twitter at least, is a science communicator, author, and cheese enthusiast. I mean, I definitely identify with him as a cheese enthusiast, I will say. I'm a cheese enthusiast. But also, like you said, a scientific communicator and author. This is his Twitter. I do want to address a lot more the, streams and videos that have been made by scientific communicators. And I'm not saying that to belittle them. Am I a scientific communicator? I have no idea. So, like, I'm not trying to belittle anybody by putting things in quotes, but just saying that's what he called himself. And it's also what I think it's an accurate term for many people. Michio Kaku, I know he also does work on, technical physics, but still. But he's much more well known for being a scientific communicator. Same with Sabine Hossenfelder and Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you could even say in some ways Sean Carroll, but I do understand that he is also working on technical physics. But there are many people who out there who we could definitely say are scientific communicators. Especially also in the biological sciences and kind of evolution and the whole debate regarding creationism and things like that. A lot of people who are evolutionary biologists get involved in that. So Dave Farina had a debate with James Tour, and we're going to look at that. So one thing that I want to get out of the way first, though, is my own personal background. If you're not aware, I grew up very involved in the sciences. I was a biology major in college in the beginning, at least for the first 2 years, and I work with some of the top herpetologists and zoologists in the world, and still do have, for decades, both in the wild and in captivity, particularly involving herpetology, which is reptiles and amphibians. But I have had a passion for science my entire life. I don't even know what that really means anymore, but I like learning about the world and how things work. And then I was a self-described atheist until I was 24. I, like I said before, grew up in a secular Jewish household, had a theophany when I tried to figure out how to create a artificial general intelligence, and then had to investigate consciousness and sentience much more deeply, and have now been working on sentient singularity theory, which is much more formally going to be revealed throughout this year, and am now a theist, like devout, and and I would even go so far as to say you could define me as a Christian too. And Jewish. I keep the Sabbath, I keep kosher, things like that. But I didn't used to do that, and my life is definitely much more observant than it was preceding my theophany. I was not observant at all. So that's where I'm coming from on this. My theophany was not due to reading scripture. I realized that God is a logical inevitability. And that is because sentience is fundamental. And if sentience is fundamental and there's a singular existence, there's a singular sentience that is existence, and that is also at the, it is the initial condition of existence, and also the inevitable condition of existence. So if that's the case, then there's a God. I'm not trying to get into this God, that God, this scripture, that scripture. We're not going to talk about scripture. Scripture for me came later. I do believe in, that scripture is divinely revealed, and we will talk about religion and scripture and sentient singularity theory and how they relate, because they do, later. But a fundamental theory relates to everything. Even if you don't believe in religion, you must believe that or religion, you must believe that the patterns of a fundamental theory will matter to every field, including those that you think are made up. So, just, maybe differently if it's not fundamentally true, it's not something that's true or that you would think of as true, but they would be there. I do think that it's true, but it's that what that means we'll say for another stream. But this revelation, epiphany, theophany that I had, that brought me to being a theist, and sparked this theory, sentient singularity theory, was not due to scripture. It was due to logic. That's what it was due to. It was due to boiling down first principles to its very first principle. Not just boiling down things to first principles, but boiling down even first principles to its first principle. The first principle of first principles. And I did a stream on that recently. But so that's, where I'm coming from on this. I have background in both the secular atheist, aka anti-theist, worldview, and I also, in a lot of personal experience with it, and I also have, personal experience with being totally a theist. So, and not even just a theist, but a believer in the Abrahamic traditions. So, in the scriptures of the Abrahamic tradition. So, I have been able to see this issue very much from both sides, and from first person in both sides. I'm not somebody who only understands one of these from a third person onlooker perspective, observer perspective. I experienced being a scientific atheist, aka anti-theist, and also someone who is, has experienced God in their personal life, and in as profound ways as you can, and also in the everyday, and also believes in scriptures and things like that. So I really do have a deep understanding and a first person understanding, which is very important, of both sides of this debate, which should not be a debate, but we will get to that. So here is the first clip of the debate between Dave Farina and James Tour. If you have any questions, please comment them in the chat. If you have any issues with the sound or anything like that, please let me know in the chat. So this is the first clip. In this first clip, I love what James Tour brings up. Something that I've never actually heard anybody say this before, and I've never even heard anybody say it in a different way than he is, but it's very much on point, which is relating to how people say that religious scientists rely on a God of the gaps. So anything they don't understand, we just attribute that to God, and we say, okay, see, we do understand now, because we don't understand how you get a multicellular organism from a single cellular organism. I'm not talking about the creation of a multicellular organism from a single cellular organism, from a single cell inside of like a womb or something like that, or inside an egg. I'm talking about getting from bacteria to a worm. That's what I'm talking about. And so people say that, we just say God. And that I think is, I don't want to call it an oversimplification because I think that it is very often true, but I don't think that we should be doing that, even if it is true. That's not science. So, but on the other side of that, there is a kind of a given that is the excuse for anti-theists or atheists, quote, self-described atheists, but you can't really be an atheist. You either are a theist or an anti-theist. You can be a confident theist or a confident anti-theist, but or not so confident theist or not so confident anti-theist, but you can only be a theist or an anti-theist. Do you think that existence itself is a singular sentient being? If so, you're a theist. If you think that at the very beginning of the initial conditions of existence or of the universe there was a singular sentient being, then if so, then you're a theist. If not, then you're an anti-theist. If you think that consciousness evolves from unconsciousness and is an emergent characteristic of matter, then you are an anti-theist. If you think that consciousness is fundamental and that there's a single consciousness at the very top or very fundamental levels of this this structure that we call, the cosmos, then you are a theist. We're not going to get into religion. So, this is the first clip.
Church or religious podcast, I never couple those to my scientific criticisms of origin of life research. I will not appeal to the Bible, to God, to miracles, to Jesus, to God of the gaps tonight. Often, origin of life researchers have a time of the gaps appeal, where they will say something to the effect, over millions of years, such and such happened. Those bedtime stories that are devoid of any precise chemistry may as well start with once upon a time. So I hope that my opponent will likewise not appeal to ill-defined time of the gaps arguments, and that he'll stay strictly on the scientific data, the data. As for me, I will stick to the data. The topic tonight is not about me, it's whether there is a valid hypothesis to make a living cell on a mindless early Earth.
Okay. What he said there, time of the gaps argument, is brilliant. I've never heard this before. And it's very, very important to state this. But it's even more so than that. You can get into the fact that there's a probability of the gaps argument that is being made by anti-theists all the time. And this stems from many issues, but one of them is a fundamental misunderstanding of what probability even really fundamentally is. We do observe the emergent effects of that are probabilistic, distributions of outcomes and things like that, but that's not really an understanding of what probability fundamentally is. Understanding probability fundamentally is to understand causality, and that is something that you have to get into when you're arguing theism versus anti-theism. And we have to call it theism versus anti-theism. We cannot call it theism versus atheism, because that's wrong. It's just wrong. It's not a judgmental statement. It's wrong. It's a mischaracterization of one of the positions on this. You cannot not have an opinion about the fundamental nature of existence. You can have a stronger or less confident opinion on the fundamental nature of existence, but we all interact with existence all the time. So if you do have an exposure to it, you can't say I'm agnostic either. It's the same. It's somebody who's afraid to say they're atheist, but neither one of these makes sense when it comes to talking about the fundamental nature of existence that we all interact with every single day. You can be agnostic about Bigfoot. You can be lacking an opinion about Bigfoot because you just don't engage with the subject. You can be agnostic about QAnon because you just don't engage with the subject. I am agnostic about both of these subjects. That's why I'm using them as examples. I have no opinion on Bigfoot or QAnon. I just don't. And I have not looked into either enough to have really an opinion, and I don't even really understand what both of them are the arguments for them are, to be quite honest. But like you, if you're talking about the fundamental nature of existence that we all interact with with every single day and exist in every single day, you definitely have an opinion or an assumption. And it doesn't have to be correct, but just whatever it is that you truly believe. If you had to bet money, if I said $20, is the universe sentient or not? Are you inside of a big being, a big organism? Are you a cell inside of an organism, or are you a cloud of dust that through random, I guess you could say accidental, even though I don't think that term makes sense in this case, but through random drifting has achieved sentience? Like, which one is correct? And was there any conscious beings before the universe existed? Like, you have to have an opinion on that. You definitely do. And that doesn't mean, like I said, it has to be strong. But if I said, you have to pick a side, $20, what are you betting on? Everybody will have an opinion. Everyone. Whereas, like, if you said $20 QAnon, fake or real, I'd be like, I don't even know what QAnon is. I really don't. But not enough to state anything about it. But so this is something that we have to first realize we have to reframe what we mean by God and atheism or anti-theism and theism, and then we have to build from there. Because if your definition of God is different than my definition of God, and we're going to start now arguing about whether or not God should be part of our scientific discussions, or whether or not God can be, or whether or not God is responsible for the origins of life, we need to have shared definitions. Is there a single sentient being at the foundations of the initial creation of the cosmos, of the universe? Is all of this within a single sentient being? That's the question. And if you believe that there is a single sentient being at the foundations of the cosmos, and responsible for, or be that is the initial condition of the universe, like, then you are a theist. That's what that means. And if you don't believe that, then you are an anti-theist. If you think conscious beings evolve from unconscious inanimate matter that is somehow, some way, still being animated enough to cause creation of sentient beings, then you are an anti-theist. And I realize that sounds like I'm mocking that a bit, but I'm just highlighting the argument, the exact argument. And yes, I do think that the logic does break down. So, there you go. But but this time of the gaps argument, this is very common, and it's the same exact argument as the many worlds argument that people like Sean Carroll and others talk about. And Brian Keating, who is an experimental physicist at UC San Diego, he has a podcast called Into the Impossible on here. He made a video for PragerU when I worked there years ago, and it was called God or the Multiverse, and I've showed it on here before, but it's about how people who just, will use God, their faith in God, as like a placeholder explanation for the things that they don't understand, are not doing anything different than people who are physicists who explain that the state of our universe being as tuned, I guess, and set up for life as it appears to be, is just due to the fact that there are infinite number of universes out there, and we just happen to exist in the one that has the right conditions for generating life. But there's a multiverse that is just composed of infinite universes. And I'm not saying that statement in and of itself is wrong. Sentient singularity theory would suggest that there is multiple verses, is what I call them, that exist, kind of like Roger Penrose's aeons. But that's not... Sentient singularity theory would suggest that the conditions in each of them are essentially the same. So it's not... It doesn't have the same preconceptions as like the multiverse argument for anti-theists, which is that there's just infinite number of universes and each one has its own different kinds of laws of physics, and some of them might support life, some of them might not. But basically this is a time of the gaps or probability of the gaps argument. It is the argument that there is just a multiplicity of instances in which the outcome that we are searching for can occur, and in some of those instances it does occur because of just the nature of probability. If there's infinite universes, eventually you're going to get one with specific conditions, and that is the exact same argument as if there is an infinite amount of time, eventually some molecules are going to come together and they will result in the genesis of a single cellular organism. There's a lot of S's there. So that is really the same argument. And it's not an argument. Just like God of the gaps is not an argument. How did we get multicellular organisms from single cellular organisms? How did we get single cellular organisms from molecules? How did we get molecules from atoms? Like these, and some of these we have answers for to some degree, and some of them we do not. But to just say God is the same exact thing as saying, well, the multiverse, there's just, or just time, you give it a long enough time, eventually you're going to have the right soup. And I do realize that Dave Farina in here does state that the arguments of, oh, well, you're just saying that eventually a lightning bolt strikes in just the right spot, just the right puddle, and there you go. You have life. He says that is it's a straw man argument, and I'm not going to say he's wrong on that. I honestly need to look a lot more into the actual research that they're discussing in this debate. So we're not going to look at too much of the debate because of the fact that you would need to be very familiar with the research that they're discussing, and I'm not, and I doubt you are either. If you are, then you wouldn't be watching this. I mean, maybe you would. Hopefully you would, actually. But time of the gaps doesn't work. God of the gaps doesn't work. Multiverse of the gaps doesn't work. It's just a cop-out. So this is James Tour, talking about, in this next clip, what is what it means to have a hypothesis regarding the origin of life. And you're going to see in this debate something that I'm not trying to say that only anti-theists do what I'm going to show in this debate, because I try not to criticize people too heavily. And that's part of the reason why I try not to comment too much on like science communicators. It's unavoidable, but it's also I do actively try not to, even though I do realize that I do it, because like I said, it's just almost unavoidable. But I'm just going to show the fact that the way in which they kind of approach this debate, and it's very different. It is consistent with my experience in this field, but I'm not saying that that theists are not responsible for personal attacks in the Genesis discussion either, which is what we're going to get into. But this is James Tour talking about what is a hypothesis on the origin of life. And I actually disagree with his statement here, but regardless.
Valid hypothesis would be that he drove here in a single molecule nanocar. Though that statement might be true, it is an invalid hypothesis since we have no experimental evidence for its validity. Nobody was present at life's origin, so we will never really know how life originated. But that's not what we're seeking to answer tonight. What we're seeking is an experimentally valid, verifiable hypothesis as to how life might have originated on an early Earth. We must see the origin of life research data, not their unsubstantiated claims, even if those claims are written in their research papers. Mr. Farina, please show us their data. Show their data. My contention remains the same. One day I presume that we will have a valid hypothesis upon which life might have originated. But as of today, we do not. And with each passing year, the cellular target that we must disclose becomes harder to reach due to the increased realization of its minimal complexity. A study in the Journal of Pragmatics in 2021 considered the trend of hyperbole in scientific publications. The authors Hyland and Jiang wrote, quote, "We trace the use of 400 hyping words which seek to promote, embellish, or exaggerate aspects of research papers. Our results show a massive increase in these items, and increases are most marked in the hard sciences," unquote. So while overblown statements are occurring in all fields, origin of life takes the cake. My opponent's favorite expert, Professor Lee Cronin, said in 2011 that he'd probably create life in his lab in 2 years. He did not. Another, whom he often cites, Professor Jack Sostek, then at Harvard, now at the University of Chicago, said in 2014 that he'd create life in his lab in 3 to 5 years. He did not. Professor Dimitar Seselov from Harvard University said in 2014 that life would be created in the lab in 5 years. It did not happen, not even close. Prebiotically relevant means that we are restricted to materials, procedures, and conditions that might have been available on an early Earth. These are the 5 criteria. These are the 5 criteria that have to be experimentally addressed in a prebiotically relevant manner in order to have a valid hypothesis for life's origin. We only have time for 5 tonight. Polypeptides, polynucleotides, polysaccharides, the origin of specified information, and the assembly of the above components into an integrated, functional, living system, namely a cell, not merely a random mixture of these. If my opponent is unable to supply all 5 criteria for life, then we're currently clueless on the origin of life. But since I don't think he'll be able to supply even one of the 5, it will show that we're not merely clueless, but utterly clueless. While some would like to portray me as one of the very few people that does not accept the hyped claims of origin of life researchers, I maintain that overconfident supporters of origin of life, like my opponent, are being abandoned by the origin of life research community itself. For example, Mr. Farina's own experts whom he likes to cite are now backing away from their own overblown claims. His often cited origin of life expert, Professor Jack Sostek, now says that aside from nature's construct of RNA, invoking of, quote, autocatalytic sets was never chemically realistic, unquote. Hence, the prebiotic relevance of autocatalytic sets crumbles. It's over, according to Professor Sostek. His often cited origin of life expert, Professor Donna Blackman, now acknowledges that there are no known prebiotically relevant autocatalytic reactions that greatly enhance chirality of a substrate. The increases are minor, so no need to waste our time tonight on autocatalysis. His own origin of life expert, Professor Stephen Benner, an enormous figure in this field, now says that any group of randomly synthesized RNA molecules would afford, quote, 10 million or 100 million more molecules that catalyze the destruction of RNA, unquote, that catalyze the copying of themselves, and, quote, this will never give you life, unquote. Hence, the relevance of random RNA to make copies of itself bites the dust. It's over, according to Professor Benner himself. Origin of life expert, Professor James Shapiro now writes, certain questions like the origins of the first living cells currently have no credible scientific answers, unquote. Kingpin, Professor Richard Dawkins now says, quote, we know little more than Darwin did about how it got started in the first place. We have no evidence bearing upon the momentous event that was the start of evolution on this planet, unquote. My opponent's favorite origin of life expert, Professor Lee Cronin, now writes and says on multiple occasions that, quote, origin of life research is a scam, unquote, and, quote, there are lots of layers to the scam, unquote. A scam means a dishonest scheme or a fraud.
Okay, so I think that there's a few things that I like about this, and some that I don't. So, but for one, we've talked about Lee Cronin on here before. His assembly theory, I think, is going to be very important, and it's highly relevant to my own work. And I think he's doing great work. I do believe that, but I didn't know that he said that he was going to be able to create life in his lab within 2 years. He might have said that in the Lex Friedman interview that we discussed, but if he did, I very much would have disagreed with it. That's not going to happen, I don't believe. I don't think any of us will create life, and I think that if we do, it's going to be a facade. And I think there will be ways to test that, but it will be initially difficult to figure it out. But you can see that this is going to be difficult already when we're looking at AI programs, and people who are responsible for creating some of these programs themselves are, now claiming that this is sentient or this is generally intelligent, and that they're making claims regarding its capability that are probably not correct. It's getting difficult for even accredited quote unquote experts to identify what is alive and what isn't in the digital space. And we will also eventually do this with the physical space with nanotechnology, and also probably with programmable biology. But that's not the same thing as the creation of life, just because you can program biological structures that already do exist, or you can create new biological structures by combining biological structures that already exist. That's not the same thing. So, but one of the things that I did like about what he stated here in his opening statement is he stated 5 criteria needed for a valid hypothesis on the origin of life. That basically you need a hypothesis that explains these things: the assembly of the above components into an integrated functional living system, namely a cell, not merely randomly mixed system, the origin of specified information in the above polymers. This is almost like a meta requirement that later on in their debate, he tried to explain what this kind of meant, and Dave Farina had no idea what he was talking about. That's a difficult subject to get into, but this is basically what is the origin of information itself, and what is the contextualizing structure that is responsible for grounding all other other things that we would identify as information. What is the context that of that information that gives it the informationness that it is, essentially. So if we say this this gene is responsible for blue eyes, and this gene is responsible for brown eyes, essentially, then we can see that, yes, retroactively, and in hindsight, we can look and see what the effects are of those genes. But in the beginning, before you have an organism that has blue eyes, what is responsible for giving that gene information itself, that to even be the gene that it is? And then you extrapolate that down, to the atomic scale. But that's sentient singularity theory. If in many ways you could describe it as a theory of information, but it's a theory of information because it is a theory of the informer and the informed. It's the ones who interpret, observe, and generate the information. That's what it's a theory of, and therefore it is a theory of information. But you can't actually have a theory of information that's complete without it being a theory about the informer or the informed, because information outside of the context of communicating information is not actually information. So if I give you a bunch of random, zeros and ones and things on flash drive or something like that, but you're never able to decode it into something that you can understand, then it's not information, actually. We might call it information. The information on the disk is a bunch of this, zeros and ones, but it's like, no, it's not really information. But you can get really deep and say, like, what's responsible for the information of zeros and ones, and that is kind of not exactly. It's super relevant to what is the topic of this debate, but polynucleotides, RNA, and polypeptides, protein and enzymes. So basically, first you get molecules, then you get the complicated molecules, a more complicated molecule that you could say is, I guess, a lineage structure or a blockchain structure in some way. That's what a double helix is. DNA and RNA is, it's like a blockchain of molecules. So, and then you have carbohydrates, I guess. So I'm not an expert in this this field. I'm not an expert in chemistry. I actually failed chemistry. It was the first class I ever failed in my life. If I took it now, I'd probably be much better at it. But in high school, I never did my homework, and it was the first class I ever failed. But this, I guess, this list I'm gonna just assume is fairly accurate. But the fact that he stated a list, this is what we're looking for. This is so important. When you look at my video, Theories of Everything, a How-To Guide, that was my submission to Kirch and Mungle of the Theories of Everything YouTube channel contest, the Pace 1 contest. You can see right here the theory that I try to get down to the very fundamentals of what the first principle, using first principles, get to the first principle and get to what is the fundamental nature and structure of existence using first-hand information. So I tried to do that and then build from there. But also what I did is I tried to define what a theory of everything, quote unquote, or a fundamental theory is, which is, I argued that it was one that is concise, one that is simple, and one that is true. This is what I propose a theory of everything must be defined as. A theory of everything, fundamental theory, or unified field theory, is a recognizable, describable, predictable, and applicable pattern that occurs in every instance of objective observation, and an explanation for such a pattern. Okay, so that is very important because now it allows you to have a reference of what you're even searching for. And James Tour did that with this, which is good. Yes, he then goes on to state that so many people who are regarded as experts in biology and evolutionary sciences and chemistry and organic chemistry, probably, I mean, whatever niche aspect of biochemistry that people want to be identified as working in. All of these people working in that field basically have come out and stated that they have not been successful experimentally in generating life in the ways that they had originally assumed, and they also have had some of them state that we don't know any more than Darwin knew about the origin of all of this stuff. And maybe Darwin was right about his assumptions about the origin of all this stuff if he was a theist. I can't remember if he was or not. I think he was. At least much more so than, most of the people who, like Richard Dawkins or something like that. But, and that's true. And so I mean, he went on for a bit, but we get the point, and he's right. And but he's focused on the issue, I would say, and but then he is also appealing to authority later by just showing that, Dawkins and all of them are finally admitting that we don't know what we're talking about. And while I think that's important for the sake of the narrative in general, it's not very important to people who are actively, personally invested in the topic. It's more important for the communication of the current state of science. But he did pretty good. And then there's Dave Farina, who comes in. And I'm not saying Dave Farina isn't a very intelligent guy, isn't actually, a nice person for the most part. I'm not saying that he doesn't understand science. Like I said, I'm going to try and give him his due and look more into the things that he has communicated on his platforms. But maybe we will have people like him or other science communicators on this channel later this year who don't agree with my fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. But this next opening statement that he does is basically what I encountered and have encountered very much from the establishment I guess you could say the products of the establishment, which is people who have gone through the mainstream system of going to the university, getting a degree in physics, getting a degree in mathematics, and now they are parroting the things that they have learned secondhand in that system. And this is basically exactly what I have encountered. So I'm going to play it. And like I said, it's not for the sake of judging specifically Dave Farina. I think that there are theists who are guilty of exactly what he is, doing in this. But it's important to just see, how these talks go down, I guess. So this is his opening statement.
Creationist. He believes that God created life due to religious scripture, which to him takes priority over scientific evidence. From his website. Hey everyone, thanks to Rice University for having us here tonight. We are here because of James Tour. James is a chemist and also an apologist who lies about origin of life research on the internet. It's quite the double life. In order to understand why he does this, we turn to his faith. James has admitted publicly that he is a creationist. He believes that God created life due to religious scripture, which to him takes priority over scientific evidence. From his website, faith and belief go beyond scientific evidence for this scientist. Anyone who thinks this is not relevant to the discussion is delusional, as James is openly admitting that there's no science that could ever be done that will convince him that life was not directly created by God. He is ideologically bound to denying abiogenesis. He sometimes pretends to leave room for it, as he did just now, to seem open-minded, but he isn't. He's totally dogmatic. Therefore, his opinions on origin of life research are irrelevant, as he is approaching the field not as a scientist, but as a preacher.
Okay, first, we're going to break this down a bit, but I actually agree with what he's saying here regarding the fact that you cannot separate your beliefs about the fundamental nature of existence, which is what your beliefs on God are. They are specifically they are your beliefs about the fundamental nature of reality. That is what they are. Okay? And that is not separable from science. I cannot say that I separate my theism from my scientific pursuits. That's not true at all. It was logic that led me to theism, and then theism combined with logic led me to sentient singularity theory and many, incredible, I guess, just aspects of what sentient singularity theory can do as far as contextualization of concepts and structures across all fields that I've examined. But my theism informs everything that I try and figure out. Whether or not I try and figure out why something happened to me on a specific day is informed by my theism. That doesn't mean that I always have the answer. I usually don't. I would just be like, well, why did that happen? Well, is God trying to teach me something? I will do that, and I do believe there's value in doing that, and there is truth in that. But it also informs my my examination of biology and of chemistry and of physics. Of course, it has to. There's no separation of it. So you can't separate your theism. I don't want to say faith. Your theism from your approach to science. But you also can't separate your anti-theism either. And this is something that must be addressed and acknowledged. And that's why it's so important to say, to admit the truth that there is no such thing as atheism. Because if there is atheism, then you just have no opinion. So of course your non-opinion can't inform your pursuits and your positions and your conclusions and your approaches to deriving, the answers to scientific questions. But that's impossible. If you're an anti-theist, it is absolutely informing it should actually be informing your approach to everything. It should be informing it. There should be no judgment of people who are theists, and there should be no judgment of people who are anti-theists. If you don't see God, then I believe as a person who is totally aware of God's existence, that there's a reason why you don't see God, and that's okay. Like, it's not for me to say you should see God. Maybe you shouldn't see God. Maybe you're not ready. Maybe, it'd be bad for you right now. I don't know. Maybe it's just not the right time. But it doesn't matter, because it's not up to me to convince you of theism. I can give the logic for it. You will either be humble enough to try and steel man everything and look at things from a first principles approach, or you will not. And that's that. But same thing goes with people who are theists, and they are presented with an attempt to show evidence that God doesn't exist. Now, there is a difference, like I said, between disproving theism and disproving the Gospels, or the Torah, or the Quran. Like, that's not the same thing. And we're not going to talk about scriptures tonight, but good luck proving or disproving any of these, either of these two positions. I don't think that you can scientifically prove God's existence. You can show evidence that suggests, but you can't prove it, and you can't prove God's non-existence either. Maybe you can show evidence that suggests, but you cannot prove either way. So it really comes down to who or which perspectives gives you better predictive abilities in things that you can actually test. And then you have to take that into account when you are adjusting or examining your fundamental positions on the nature of reality itself. So you can't be like, well, this position allows me to predict things, with 90 to 100% accuracy, and, just for the sake of argument, and this position only lets me do it 10% of the time. But the position that allows me to do it with, 100% accuracy almost must be incorrect. Maybe it is, but you shouldn't assume that it is. You should probably assume that it's more likely that it's correct, or at least there's an aspect of it that is correct that's allowing you to do what make predictions, accurately and often. But so when people say things like, "Oh, well, I keep my religion and my science separate," this is why I try not to use the word religion on here, because what the heck does that even mean? You should keep scripture and science separate, I would say, at least in general. But you should not keep your theism or your anti-theism separate from your scientific pursuits and approaches and interpretations. You can't, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't. My theism should inform my scientific pursuits and interpretations. And if you're an anti-theist and you don't believe in God, which means you disbelieve in God, which means you're an anti-theist, not an atheist, then that should inform your scientific positions. And you see that with things like many worlds. It is informed by an anti-theistic position, as it should be, for people, if it's the theory of people who are anti-theists. Whereas sentient singularity theory, very much informed by the position that existence initially is a singularity of sentience, and inevitably, eventually, is a singularity of sentience. So, but this is, he goes on.
Of course, James pretends his rhetoric is scientific. He will bring up his H-index and list of publications. Less important is the fact that he has publicly admitted that his students do all the work and he slaps his name on the papers. More important is the fact that none of his research has anything to do with the origin of life whatsoever and does not qualify him in this topic, which is not strictly synthetic organic chemistry as he claims, but also astronomy, geology, physics, and lots of other areas James is clueless about. When it comes to this topic, James is a YouTuber. His embarrassing commentary takes place exclusively on YouTube or in-person events for science literate Christians who share his biases and delusion.
By the way, this is coming from somebody who describes themselves on their own Twitter as a scientific communicator. I don't if you think that and if you say things like, I'm just a science communicator, I'm not actually a professor, but you're going to a debate like this, like, you shouldn't be there, And I'm not saying that that just because you have a YouTube channel and you're not published in papers, you shouldn't be speaking about science. That would make me a hypocrite. I'm not going to say that. I disagree with anybody who would say that. But but don't criticize somebody for just, even if James Tour was never cited in papers, even if he wasn't a professor that is employed at a university of, professor of various scientific topics, like, it doesn't matter. We're talking about the topics. We're not talking about credentials. We're not talking about, a specific person, or we shouldn't be. We should be talking about the arguments, the logic, definitions, things like that. And it really should be a debate format is just a bad format. But this is interesting because ultimately, this theism, a theistic interpretation or an anti-theistic interpretation of anything in science or politics or whatever, it doesn't matter. So social economics and personal morals and things like that. It should be, it always devolves into a debate because you're talking about basically trying to convince somebody else that their fundamental worldview on everything is wrong. That's tough. That's not just, oh, listen, your equation there, you made a calculation error. You accidentally, duplicated your cell in Excel in your calculation. I don't know, like some tiny little minor thing where it's like a mistake. That's not what people are doing. They're not saying even, hey, you're wrong about where cells come from. They're saying you're fundamentally wrong about basically most of what you claim to know about most of the things that are involved in your worldview. Now must be readdressed. And if you're not wrong about them insofar as your conclusions, you need to reevaluate why you have the positions you have, because the reasons why you have the positions you have are wrong, even if the positions that you have eventually are correct. So that is, you're telling somebody that they are wrong about everything, essentially, and that's very, very hard to do. And we instinctually realize this when we get into this debate, and that's why it turns so ugly. It's not just a little discussion about how many strings are in the string theory universe or whatever. It's like you're wrong about everything, from your morals to your politics to your interpretations of evolution and biology and chemistry and everything. So, continuing.
James knows that science is done through the primary scientific literature, and he knows that his inability to publish anything on this topic makes him completely irrelevant. That's why he regularly lies and pretends that he is published in this area, and his papers are ignored because of conspiracy. These papers are actually blog posts in Inference Review, launched by Discovery Institute propagandist David Berlinski, which is not peer-reviewed and exists for the sole purpose of making pseudoscience appear more legitimate. Jim's clueless ramblings do not even remotely resemble primary scientific literature, but he lists them among his actual science on his website anyway. Of course, when facing this topic, James somehow forgets what primary literature is supposed to look like. That's how he initially got into hot water, slandering Nobel laureate Jack Szostak. James was complaining about the prestigious journal Nature and what Szostak allegedly published in it, and how it doesn't meet the typical standards of the journal. He called Jack a liar multiple times, to the delight of his clueless, cackling audience. In actuality, it wasn't primary literature at all, but a web article meant for laypeople, and there were no lies or inaccuracies, as James continues to claim to this day. His profoundly unprofessional and defamatory behavior has only gotten worse, as he now regularly attacks prominent researchers in this field, or blatantly misquotes and misrepresents them. And that's why we're here, to highlight Jim's fraudulence. There's nothing to debate. The question as to whether we are clueless about the origin of life is idiotic. We aren't. Apologists like James train viewers to regurgitate the ridiculous lie that there's been no progress since the Miller-Urey experiment of the 1950s. In reality, we have multiple viable prebiotic synthetic pathways to all the relevant biomolecules and their polymers, and systems chemistry is showing us how sets of these molecules can have evolved over millions of years to produce the first protocell, which we will discuss later. James knows essentially nothing about any of it, but pretends to for his viewers who take him on blind faith, something they are quite comfortable doing. So we'll get to James fumbling the science in a moment, but first it is important to establish that James is a brazen liar and charlatan in ways that everyone can understand without knowing anything about science. For example, part of Jim's script is to complain about the primordial soup model. He describes this as lightning striking some water and molecules form a slithering creature that crawls out. This is the dumbest straw man in history. Yet he insists that all these textbooks say precisely this, and it is taught to undergraduates as well as graduate students. In actuality, the textbooks look like this. They contain summaries of much of the research we will discuss momentarily. Syntheses of biomolecules, ribozymes, autocatalysis, and other complex concepts. So he's just lying. He's trying to make science he doesn't like seem infantile and stupid. Another way he downplays the validity of the field is to pretend that almost no one is working in it. He claims it's a...
Okay, so I'm going to try to not not chase a chicken with its head cut off in this stream. So I had this quote on my YouTube channel a while back, and it went on my Twitter, and it said, "If you chase a chicken with its head cut off, you are a chicken with its head cut off, or you become a chicken with its head cut off." And I came up with this many years ago when I was observing politics, and I was seeing that every time people were just complaining or attacking what someone else was doing because they maybe even rightly identified that something that they were wrong about something, instead of proposing the correct thing and showing it and focusing on it, if your focus is on what is wrong, then you will not be productive, essentially. So I'm human, so I might not do the best job, but I'm going to try to not be a chicken with its head cut off. And I would say that we are all sometimes chickens with their heads cut off. But right here, that's what we're watching. Chicken with its head cut off. And I'm not saying that James Tour doesn't have those issues here or in other instances that are being referenced in this. Probably, we are all human. But that's not the point. The point is that James Tour gave us a framework and a list of criteria for what we are, that must be fulfilled by what we are searching for, which would be a hypothesis on the origin of life. And he also gave kind of an overview, and yeah, it got a little personal with who he was referencing, but that's not necessarily wrong, but of just statements by people who are considered leaders in the field, and also highlighted the results of the people who were leaders in the field, like Lee Cronin, and people who said, "Oh, we're going to make life in our lab in 2 years," and then they didn't do it. That's okay to say. It's not very productive on its own, because it just shows, hey, we have been unproductive, and just to say we've been unproductive is not the same thing as being productive, but it is sometimes an important first step. But to just personally attack someone alone, and like I said, everybody's guilty of personal attacks, myself included, but that shouldn't be the opening argument on the origin of life. Should not be, oh, this person is a fraud, or this person is a pseudoscientist, or this person is just, should not be trusted because they have faith in things blindly that don't make any logical sense. That's, we can get into whether, the faith, the blind faith, you could call it, but I don't really like saying blind faith, but the faith that people who are anti-theists have in certain narratives that they haven't thought through, quite highly enough, that support their position on things. But regardless, the point is that these two people opened this debate not focused on the same thing. One of them is focused on their opponent, and the other one is focused on the goal. Okay? And that is something to be aware of in these discussions that we need to have going forward. But we also need to give grace to each other when we see this, because if all we're going to do is attack each other for attacking each other, then and not forgive each other literally, like we literally will not make scientific progress, because you must forgive the people who do this kind of thing, and people when they do this kind of thing, not the people who do this kind of thing, because we all do this kind of thing, but when people do this kind of thing, because otherwise, how are you ever going to have a productive discussion after that if you're just basically calling them terrible names for calling you terrible names, and now it's just two chickens with their heads cut off chasing each other? Like, good luck, resolving that and stopping that cycle of chaos. But lots of things are being stated here that I think we just need to avoid ever having brought up in any discussion that is truly humble and honest. Things like terms like pseudoscience. What the hell does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a slanderous term. And I think accusing people of lying unless you think that they're purposely lying is wrong. It's not something that we should. It's just saying something that isn't true is not the same thing as lying. Lying must be very intentional, I think, and you have to know that it's intentional. You can't just assume the worst in people. You have to assume the best intentions of people, or else you can't get anywhere. At least in the majority of your interactions. But this is why the debate style sucks, and but it's very hard to avoid this happening, even in a personal discussion on the topic that is, completely related to theism versus anti-theism. Any topic that's completely related to theism versus anti-theism. And honestly, this is increasingly every topic that we see. You have to intentionally, purposely, artificially segment off a topic in order to not have it relate back to, a theistic or an anti-theistic perspective on the world. Like, you have to. So, just important to see. I don't want to go...
With no more than a dozen teams examining the problem. That's a lie. There are thousands of scientists working on this all over the world. He needs to lie about this because it's much more admitted that he's read less than 5% of the literature on the topic.
And so, he just goes on and on about like whether or not he's read enough literature and things like that. But, and also, attacks certain arguments that James Tour has made that aren't particularly relevant, like, that there's not very many people working on this, and I guess Dave Farina says there's thousands of people working on this. That doesn't matter. Like, none of that matters to the debate here. The debate is on, do we have valid supported, I guess you could say, hypotheses on the origin of what we call life in scientific, community today. We don't. And I do get that, it might be kind of a straw man argument. It's a very simplified statement to say, they say that in biology that a lightning bolt struck a puddle and then a snake crawled out, but that might not be what is written in the textbooks, but it is the inevitable interpretation that comes from the perspective that is being described or presented in our university system to students. It absolutely is, and I know that from first-person experience with it. And it doesn't make sense, but it's not an explanation. So I do understand why people would say things like that, and I'm guilty of simplifying, statements that people make about probability and the origins of life and things like that, but or the creation of the universe. But it's okay to simplify things as long as your simplification is accurate to the message that's being conveyed in what you are describing. And that is the message that's being described, or that's being relayed in the descriptions that are being put forward in our universities, is that lightning might have struck a puddle in there for, cellular life crawled out of it. And that is, inevitably cellular life turns to a snake. But at least some of it. But it doesn't matter that the textbook has all these diagrams of molecules merging and equations in it. Like, that's not the point. The point is that you might be trying to describe the processes that occur in that specific instance, but we have not been able to replicate that ever anywhere. We don't actually have evidence that there was that entropy wouldn't just be the trend. Like, entropy is an emergent and characteristic of matter that we perceive in the universe and contend with in space-time, and it is everywhere that we look within the environment of space-time, and that is the opposite of generative combination and creation that you would need in order to actually have growth of anything. So I get everybody says things in a debate that I'm not going to agree with everything anybody says, but I think that it's important that two people in a discussion, when they enter into a discussion, are focused on the same thing. Can we come up with a productive, concept or model that allows us to solve a problem or answer a question that we have? And that's it. Like, it should not be, oh, he's a pseudoscientist and it shouldn't even really be, when James Tour says that the university is lying to you, that they don't know what they're, and they don't really know what they're talking about. I actually think that they're not lying to us. They're lying to themselves if they're lying, but they're actually, you could just give them the benefit of the doubt and say that most of the people who are responsible for pushing forward an anti-theistic narrative are extremely confused. They don't know that there's an issue there, And I have personal experience with this. I remember when I was still an anti-theist, self-described atheist, and I met my wife, my now wife, but we were dating at the time, and we had just started dating, and we were making dinner, and I think it was one of the first times we were ever making dinner together, and I keep and study reptiles. I have dozens of geckos and snakes, and I put them together and breed them for different colors and patterns, so I understand Punnett squares and inheritance, and I understand that breeding for specific traits can exaggerate some and things like that. So I do understand genetic mutation and inheritance, and you could call it microevolution, even though I don't like the term, and I understand selection, obviously natural and artificial selection, but this is a huge part of my life, and I see it firsthand, because I don't just learn about Punnett squares in the classroom. I put snakes together, and over multiple generations I get the odds that I should have gotten and the odds that I did predict using a Punnett square model regarding the coloration of snakes. I do that personally. I have firsthand experience with it. It might not sound, that profound, and might not be, but the thing is I do have a level of understanding of it that is not the same as somebody who just memorized it in the classroom. I know it's true. I don't think it's true because somebody taught me in a classroom. I know it's true. I know the odds, how probabilistic, distributions of inherited traits, can be predicted for the most part. I know that. And, so I went to my wife and I was like, do you believe in evolution? Or do you believe that God created the universe? And she was like, both. And I was like, well, I've never even thought about those being not mutually exclusive, before in my life. I've always assumed that they were just incompatible concepts. And it took Pretty Girl for me to like actually rethink that. And I literally had discussions with my rabbi as a teenager, when I was getting bar mitzvahed, and he was like, what do you think about God? And I was like, I don't believe in God. The universe was not created in 7 days because we have fossils that have been here for, millions of years. And I know enough about reptiles and to know that, they've been around for a while. And he was like, well, what if the universe, a day is different, at different points in the universe's, process, I guess you could say. So, or he said, a day to God, what if a day to God is different from a day to us? And I was like, that's just a cop-out. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I didn't believe it as being a good argument. And it's not a good argument because it's what if this? It's like, well, do you have any evidence for the what if this that you are presenting? And he didn't, so that it didn't sway me at all. But the talk with my wife did make me just realize that at least, even if, God didn't create the universe, at least the concept was not incompatible with the concept of evolution. And we're going to talk a bit about what evolution is in this stream tonight, because I think that we don't actually know what it means in a way that is really well defined. And it needs to be, because we are arguing theism or creationism versus evolution. And what does that even mean, creationism? It's usually assumed to mean God created the world in literally 7 days, exactly as we experience days. And that's not even consistent with exactly the Hebrew of the original Torah. 7 yom is 7 periods. So maybe it's a day. Maybe it's that we, in the way that we understand, maybe it's a period that is not defined by going around the sun, because the sun maybe didn't exist yet. I mean, maybe it means that both, could be simultaneously true. But that's not the point for the discussion tonight. But I'm just saying that we don't know what these words mean. Creationist, evolution, and these concepts that we use to just lump in your entire worldview. Theism versus anti-theism, that, if you're defining that correctly, which is, and yes, it's correctly versus incorrectly, it's not like your definition versus mine. It's theism is, do you believe that existence is a singular sentient being and that the universe was created by, or you could say that multiplicity of sentience and the universe was created by this single sentient being? If so, you're a theist. If not, then you're an anti-theist. If sentience is not fundamental, you're an anti-theist. Like, that is the definition. It must be. It is the logically inevitable definition. And yes, those two perspectives, theism and anti-theism, inform everything that you do, and they are totalizing perspectives. Like, they should inform everything that you do. Trying to separate them off is wrong. It's not the way to think. You actually can't do it. You cannot ignore your perspective on those things and actually make any progress trying to figure out anything. You have to assume one or the other. Even if you're just assuming for the sake of argument the other side, which you should do sometimes. If you want to consider anti-theism honestly, you have to assume it's true and then look for evidence of it. If you want to consider theism honestly and you're an anti-theist currently, you have to assume theism and look for evidence of it. And you have to assume the correct definition of theism, which is, that existence is a singular sentient being, or that the universe was created by a single sentient being, created within a single sentient being. But we need to just have much better definitions, is my point.
Although in reality, over 3 million papers have been published since 2016, so he's read maybe 0.1% of the literature. More importantly, for the few papers he has read, the diligence he projects is a facade. As to anyone knowledgeable, he reveals a level of incompetence that is shocking for someone of his stature. Take, for example, this study by Stephen Benner, a researcher James regularly slanders. Here, Benner is showing nucleotide polymerization over basaltic glass to form RNA. James notes that Benner washes the glass thoroughly with hydrogen peroxide and ultra-pure water, and then throws his hands in the air about how this makes the study not prebiotically relevant, because he is washing away trace magnesium that would impede nucleotide polymerization on the early Earth. In his profound ignorance, James neglects to realize that basaltic rock is specifically rich in magnesium, information that anyone who had taken Geology 101 would know. Furthermore, he wonders where could one find hydrogen peroxide and ultra-pure water on the early Earth, as though its use makes the study not prebiotically relevant. In reality, these are used to destroy biological material like bacteria that would contaminate the results. So, in fact, the washes are done specifically to make the experiment prebiotically relevant. This example is crucial because James will focus much of his empty criticism on claiming that research is not sufficiently prebiotic. But remember this example where James was so clueless that he does not even understand what the researchers are doing and why. This is his primary tactic. He skims the supplemental section of the paper, invents a technical flaw out of thin air, and pretends it negates the results of the paper, and by extension, origin of life research in general. But it gets much worse. James regularly botches concepts not just in geology, but also in his own field. For example, we return to Benner's research where he synthesized ribose in prebiotically relevant fashion.
See, okay, this, like, the point, focusing on, like, oh, he botched these concepts, he couldn't have possibly read all the papers, his misinterpretation of this, like, none of this is actually about, like, what the debate was supposed to honestly be about. And like I said, I don't know enough about the fields to really get into exactly what they were discussing back and forth in regards later on in the debate regarding the technicalities of the combination of molecules and things like that. But the point is that you have to propose something constructive, and I do wonder if it's even possible to do this as an anti-theist, like, because you're defining yourself. If theism is true, okay, just assume for the sake of argument that it's true, even if you don't believe it. That means that being an anti-theist is to be someone who is at their fundamental their fundamental defining ideology is to disregard, or not just disregard, but to deny the truth of the fundamental nature of reality. And then, therefore, you have to build on that. And it's intrinsically negative. It's anti-theism. Okay? It's intrinsically negative. And it requires intrinsic faith in a way that is exactly what they, many anti-theists tend to oppose, or claim to oppose. But I think that that's a multifaceted problem, but that also occurs because people who are religious don't. They're also very often they're not equipped to get into the sciences of things, and they will often be anti-science, and anything that is not religion is bad and therefore false, and like their religion, not their theological tradition. If it's not in the Torah, or it's not in the the Old Testament or the New Testament or the Quran, then it's false, and like don't believe it. And as somebody who takes those scriptures as being revealed by God and having extraordinary as having super literal truth and super like super aware wisdom, I don't know, it's, like beyond superhuman wisdom, like that, I still will say that you can't just deny learn experimental evidence of something, or trying to avoid contending with the subject. If you truly believe in your God that you believe in, then you shouldn't avoid any results at all that exist, because inevitably you should have enough of conviction to trust that your viewpoint will be that God's glory, God will be glorified and validated and supported by the scientific evidence that comes forward. So you shouldn't be anti-science if you are pro-God. You should not be anti-science. And we do have a problem with that. that has been a multi-generational problem. So I do understand where a lot of the I guess the framing comes from that is probably leading to the way that Dave Farina and many others who are anti-theists come at this subject with. But I also don't know if it's possible for them to propose like a positive model. Which the thing is I mean, maybe you could argue that many worlds is, and even, but the thing is it's not really, because it's still time of the gaps model. It's like that's what it is. It's God of the gaps, but it's like anti-God of the gaps model. It's like saying, well, eventually, of course, anything that will happen, that can happen, will happen eventually. Like saying that is not. That's the same thing as saying, well, God has his ways of doing things. It's like God's will be done. Okay, well, eventually anything that can't happen will happen. And I would say that neither one of those is just a good argument. They're just not. But they're not even an argument, to be quite honest. But even if you assume that anti-theism is capable of generating positive models that and not just claiming that there is a lack of evidence of God, so therefore or there's a lack of proof. There is a lack of proof, but there is no lack of evidence, I would say, but there is a lack of proof. I mean, what is it that you need to prove to you? There's not a lack of proof in my life, personally, but my personal experiences are not and I've talked about them on here. They were at least one of them was profound. It wasn't just like a feeling or like that I got. It was like more than that. I have to trust that that's true over like what someone tells me secondhand. I have to. You have to trust firsthand information above secondhand information. I would say that the fundamental problem that has caused the misframing of all of this, or the terrible toxic framing that we now have on both sides of the this argument, the theists and the anti-theists, is primarily due to the fact that our schools have focused for decades and decades and generations at this point on teaching people secondhand information and expecting them to trust it completely. And schools much better schooling system would be one that provides and supports experiences that lead to first-hand information being gained about certain things. If you want to learn about Punnett squares and things like that, you go and you breed beta fish for specific colors or something like that. You can see it happening firsthand. You can experience it. You're not just being told it and taking it on faith that like what is written in the textbook is true, and what is being conveyed by the teacher who just read it in the textbook knows exactly what is right and correct and incorrect. Like that is a huge problem, and it should be a huge problem for everybody. If you're an anti-theist, you should still think that is a huge problem. It is a huge problem to sense making in and of itself. Is that we've basically we've elevated secondhand information above firsthand information in people's worldviews. And that is terrible. That has happened in theistic communities and religious communities, as well as in anti-theist, communities. I've had multiple friends and family members, even, but multiple friends. My personal family, I grew up secular completely, but or at least my immediate family. But I have extended family that was not quite as secular, and I have many friends who grew up in much more of a religious environment. They went to Catholic school or something like that, and in their house they were taught, the Bible, and they prayed every day, and they went to church, and we're read scripture every day, and they still years later, when they moved out and went to college or whatever, they were like, hey, I used to believe that like God just created the universe, and now I just realize like that's like I didn't believe in evolution. I thought evolution was crazy, and that's just what I believed. Now I realize I was like totally wrong, and there's so much wrong that led to that specific perspective and circumstance that they have, because it's, like I said, it's this framing that has occurred in our schools of evolution versus theism. First of all, you need to define evolution, because if evolution is just is just selection, it's just selection of traits over time, then that is not incompatible with theism. But also, you need to properly define theism, and it can't just be based on this very narrow version of scripture. That doesn't mean that scripture is wrong. It just means if all that somebody's presented with is this narrow version of scripture, or then they didn't experience God in their life that way, then they're going to be motivated against God falsely. And so you need to present these things much without agenda. And I think that the first trouble is realizing that, or not without an agenda, but with the agenda of the truth being guiding. And unfortunately, that's not exactly the agenda that is usually leading any discussion. It's the agenda of Christianity, but not just Christianity, but Catholicism, or like the agenda of Orthodox Judaism, Hasidic Judaism, or something, or the agenda of anti-theistic, new atheists or something like that, like Sam Harris and Dawkins and all those people, in their perspective, the new atheist perspective, like that. These are not truth alone driven, communities defined by the truth alone. Like, they're not just seeking truth, even though they are, but they're also not really. Like, they don't realize it though. So when people say, when James Tour or somebody says that the universities are lying and these people are lying, and I don't know, people who Dave Farina is mentioning are lying, I don't think that it's good to say that they're lying. You have to assume that they're not, that they're just confused, even if you think they're wrong. Once I was in some math PhD student and physics student said to me on a Discord once, they were like, oh, Tyler, I really think that you're misunderstanding what Bott periodicity is, because I proposed an idea that I have of what Bott periodicity is in mathematics, and where it manifests in the cosmos, and it's related to evolution. I think that it's like the periods of evolution, and they said, I think you're misunderstanding it, and you don't understand what you're talking about, and you're interpreting a lot of these physics structures. And I was like, okay, here, let's meet about it, and you can talk to me about it. And we went to a call, and other people ended up watching this because it ended up being entertaining. But the guy's like, no, actually, it's not what you think it is. It's these periods of loop spaces. I'm like, I'm not saying it's not, but what else is? Like, what is that loop space that, where is it that you can point to, not just say it, but like using abstract terminology, but like, where is it really? And he was like, well, eventually he was like, well, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I can tell you that it's not what you think it is. And somebody correctly realized, they were like, okay, so you actually don't know what it is then. And this is happening, I think, a lot in our university systems. And the reason why is because of that whole issue involving firsthand versus secondhand information, how we're elevating secondhand information above firsthand information that we gain through experience. And we really need to differentiate these two types of information that we take in our life, and kind of maybe even formally in school, and show people through firsthand experience, why firsthand experience is so much, should be prioritized above secondhand information. And you should approach them differently. I don't know, you'd have to fundamentally, completely reorganize our education system in order to do that. So, like I said, these are multifaceted issues when you're getting into this theory of everything discussion, which is why there's so many theories of everything. Many of them end up being very similar, but they just go around in circles and nobody really makes that much progress. It's because you have to address simultaneously so many issues, which really means you can't just try and fix the current university system and our education system and such. You have to build new ones, and nobody's really doing that. And I talked about this in my very first stream that I ever did on here. It's video was called "Escaping Our Academic Institutions" or something. It was during the COVID lockdowns, and we're going to have to build new systems that address multiple issues that are required to be addressed simultaneously in order to make progress on many of these topics, like what is the origin of life, and what is the meaning of life, and all these other questions that have profound multi field implications. So, like I said, the most important thing here, though, when in these discussions, is grace. If somebody doesn't know God, you both have to come to a common understanding of God in your discussion first, which is there's one definition that is accurate, that is also encompassing of every other perspective that is taken on God by theological traditions, and is also differentiated enough to be specific. It's not just a higher power. God is not just, I believe in a higher power. I believe that a sentient being is responsible for the initial creation of the cosmos. I believe that existence is fundamentally sentient. I believe that everything exists within and is therefore subject to a singular sentient being. Like, that is theism. And that is the shared definition that must be agreed upon before any of this debates and things happen. Otherwise, you're just going to spiral. And as entertaining as it is, that doesn't mean that it's constructive. It's not.
Cartoon after cartoon, childishly mocking Benner for his garbage data. Here's this laughing Spanish guy meme where the whole crowd laughs in unison at the idiot Benner, who thinks he got ribose when it's actually a mess of a billion compounds. But the joke is on James, as his pathetic commentary reveals that he can't even read a 13C NMR spectrum, something he should have learned as an undergrad. James compares the spectrum to that of pure ribose when the sample is ribose borate, a different compound, with broad peaks due to...
Okay. I'm tempted to just keep watching, but that's not what is constructive. But it's just... You can see what I mean. But the thing is it's I'm not saying that James Tour wasn't guilty of what he is, accusing him of. He probably was, but he's human. But now, if you're focusing on it, you're going to become guilty of it too. So if you're like, so-and-so mocked me, with memes, and you're just mocking them with memes at the same time, it's like, what are we doing, guys? Both these guys are clearly intelligent, and I'm assuming that both of them have honest intentions, but there's a different way to approach this discussion. And I would love to have a discussion, by the way, with Dave Farina on this this channel. I would say I'm very open to having that talk, even live, if that's what he would prefer. But I don't want it to be a debate. It would be, we'd have to come at the beginning of the discussion to an agreed upon definition of specific terms, and then maybe we talk about the definitions of other terms for the rest of the stream. I don't care. My goal is not to convince him of God. I can't do that. I just can't. And I don't want to either. If he doesn't know God, then there's a reason. If God exists, then there's a reason why he doesn't. And who am I to try and change his mind on it? but we can have a discussion about like what it would mean for God to exist, and come to a common understanding of what each other believes. Like that is a much more constructive talk, and I would love to have that talk on this channel. I've debated on whether or not I should have discussions with people who are critics of my own work, and for the same reasons that basically is going on here. But I'm down to try it at least once, because it's very often that people don't actually have the honest intentions, and they don't even realize it. But at the same time, it's on you to kind of clarify exactly what those intentions should be at the very beginning of the discussion, and you have to give people the benefit of the doubt, like I said earlier, at least sometimes, in order to make progress. So this is that's an invitation, but I'll reach out and see if we can actually get him on here for a talk. But okay, to get away from that. Next clip. This is the talk that James Tour got into with religious leaders.
We're getting a divorce.
Christian and Jewish religious leaders about just science and theism, which is not they're not opposing things.
I'm in both of these communities. Mm-hmm. And I feel that this community is sitting here as if we really know what we're doing, and the other community is all wrong. The reason, I think, we need to look to ourselves as scientists. We need to look to ourselves. To say it's Ken Ham, it's that community, it's all about them, it's all their problem, and we know what's right, I think is a prescription for disaster. I sit between Christians and Jews all the time, and I love both communities, and I'm from both communities. And it bothers me when one community starts firing at the other and the other at the one. This is exactly what's happening here, I think. We're all sitting around, oh, it's terrible what's happening. One of the reasons for the distrust from that community toward people like us at meetings just like this, where we sit around and act as if we really know stuff and we've got this thing right. I've written 2 articles on origin of life. Nobody has contested the scientific claims. It has nothing to do with God. It's all about life's origin based on the science. On my website, jmtour.com, there's a tab on the right called Personal Topics. You go to Evolution Creation. I cite both of those articles there, and I'm coming out with a 3rd article for a moratorium on origin of life research, because there's so many lies in it. You make a little sort of thing, and you extrapolate to the point where the...
Okay, I'm not saying there isn't lies in it, but you have to, people are going to assume that you're saying that they're lying, and I think they're just confused. I think that we on all sides of this are so confused in the theist positions and communities, and in the anti-theist, atheist positions and communities. We're all so confused, and that's because partially it's just been pitted unintentionally through the schools. Also, again, this is, I think, the core of the problems that we've had here, is the schools tried to teach religion because they were already teaching religion, and it was the default narrative of the communities, at least in the West, was Christianity. Then somebody came in, probably someone who was Jewish, and was like, we don't believe in that, so you should teach Judaism too. And then somebody who was Buddhist came in, was like, oh, actually, I want my kids, you can't exclude Buddhism. And then Islam came in, everything, Mormonism, whatever. And then by the end, you have a person who's just some teacher teaching about all these religions that they don't believe in, they don't understand, they have no background in, or first-hand information in. They're only teaching second-hand information at this point, and they're also teaching only second-hand information, for the most part, about the various scientific fields, biology, chemistry, physics, etc. They don't have first-hand experience running experiments regarding quantum physics. Maybe they do Newtonian physics, but not quantum physics. We all run experiments with Newtonian physics all the time. You throw a punch, you throw a kick, you throw something across the room, whatever. You try and pick something up. This is all experimentation in Newtonian physics to some degree. You're trying to like make the bathtub not as warm as it is. Like all of this, we have personal experience with. We just don't think about it as physics experiments. But we all know that there's that famous physics lecture where the guy takes like a ball. Wrecking ball on a chain, and he holds it to his nose and he lets it go, and he doesn't move, and it goes out and then swings back, and it almost touches his nose and comes back, but it doesn't hit him in the nose. Like we all know intuitively that would happen because we have experienced that in our lives. Like when you let something go on a pendulum, it doesn't whip back like with more power than it had when you let due to the momentum that was generated because you let it go. Like it comes back with slightly less momentum. But they don't. Most of them, they'll talk about Punnett squares, but like most of them aren't breeding snakes in their spare bedroom like I am, or like even goldfish or guppies or whatever, like geckos. Like they don't have firsthand experience with Punnett squares, other than maybe blue, eye color in their household or something like that. Like both my parents are het for blue eyes. They both have brown eyes, and all my three of my siblings have brown eyes, and I'm the only one with blue eyes. Perfect odds follows exactly like what you would expect. It doesn't mean it always ends up like that, but that's a Punnett square experiment. But they weren't thinking about that though. They probably didn't even know exactly how the blue eye gene worked. Until they looked it up after they got a kid with blue eyes. And, but, if you're trying to turn a orange and yellow snake and black snake into a pure white, like, then you're going to have to know, intentionally, you're going to have to know how Punnett square works. But one of my projects is creating a double recessive king snake that has the hypermelanistic gene, which turns everything black, and the albino gene, which is the amelanistic, lacking melanin, into one snake that takes multiple generations because they're both recessive genes, and eventually you will get a white snake. But there's a 1 in 16 chance for each egg from two parents that each carry the gene and don't express it. Each egg they have has a 1 in 16 chance of expressing both genes. Like that. Like I have firsthand experience with this stuff, and we need to change how we just teach people. But when you don't teach people properly, and you link their worldviews, like linking your position on God, to secondhand information that people learn about. For the most part, evolution is very much secondhand information for most people. It's not as much firsthand information as it is for me usually, but as it is for me, because most people are not in the field, and most people are not breeding animals in their house for specific traits. But if you're like, oh, you can either believe in religion or God, or religion and God, or evolution. And you can believe in Darwinian evolution. I don't know. Darwin's theory of evolution. It's like people knew about selection way before Darwin. Like I don't really understand why we're like, so we call it even Darwinian evolution. Like it was as if it was a new thing. But it was natural selection that was kind of more of the position that was initially given, which was not that God intentionally gave the giraffe a long neck so that it could reach higher branches, but it was just that the animal that happened to have the longer neck bred to the ones that happened to have a longer neck, because those ones survived because they ate. They got more food because they could reach it, and then eventually you get a giraffe. Like, I think that makes sense that you can argue that, but they're not. They could be two sides of one coin, and it's not really. I think it's not really an argument of two sides against each other, but presenting it as two sides that are opposing and not mutually exclusive perspectives is the problem. And then that trickle, if that impacts your position on God or the fundamental nature of existence, which is really what that means, if it impacts your position on theism versus anti-theism, it's impacting your interpretation of everything, every field, every question that you have, every topic that you try and understand and goal that you have is then filtered through the lens of those implications. And that's why people who have theistic worldviews tend to have different moral sets on certain topics than people who are usually anti-theists. Not on everything, but on specifically those things that are very much not first observed by them firsthand, very often. So, everybody has like the world would admit for the most part that you should, be kind to people or something like that. Or people will say treat, others the way you would treat your own. But most people don't take that idea, especially if you're not from a theistic worldview. You don't have a theistic worldview. You don't take that idea and extrapolate it out completely again and again and again, and really examine the logic of how you're applying that as much as somebody who is often a theist. But very often theists don't do that either. And anti-theists are going to look at those people who are hypocrites, and they're going to use them as the example for why they shouldn't be like you. And they shouldn't be like those people. They shouldn't be or behave like those people are behaving, which is, hypocritical. We should avoid hypocrisy as much as possible, even though we all are hypocrites at certain moments and in certain things. And you have to admit that too and give each other grace, or else you're just going to be like, well, so-and-so did it, and so-and-so did it, and so-and-so. It's like, that's not the point. The point is, can we make progress and be constructive in our lives and in our understanding, not point fingers of that somebody else is guilty of exactly what you're guilty of. That's chasing a chicken with its head cut off. And so it requires grace, whether you're a theist or not, to make progress on anything. Forgiveness is really the key to advancing anything forward. It doesn't matter if you believe it comes from God or not. Maybe it does, but it doesn't immediately matter in this discussion. So when James Tour is talking about, we need to look at how we are behaving in the religious community and realize that is the perspective that's being presented, if it's negative, especially to people who are anti-theists. It's like, yeah, that's true. But I don't think that you should say that there's lies in the mainstream narrative, even though I do agree that there are lies, but it doesn't mean that the people are lying to others intentionally. They're confused and therefore lying to themselves, maybe because they are afraid of, or maybe not. Maybe they just are just confused and they're not lying at all. Humility and honesty it's so important. Somebody said to me once that they criticized someone. I think it was an influencer of a conservative organization, and somebody said something to me, and they were like, did you see that so-and-so, that person who was an influencer of a conservative organization, said that they were an atheist. They don't believe in God or religion, whatever that means. And I was like, yeah, they should be honest. That doesn't mean that they're the right person for that specific job necessarily. If your job is to, you were hired to, help advance and showcase God, godliness or whatever into the, or script, the wisdom of Scripture, to communicate the wisdom of Scripture to the world. You should probably believe in that, but they should be honest. They have to be honest. It'd be worse if they worked and they had that position and they pretended to believe. That's worse. That's much worse. And I also have have people who I know. My rabbi, one of my rabbis, he told me that, and this is a Hasidic rabbi. He told me he did not believe in God until he was in his 20s, mid-20s. he was Hasidic, like grew up Hasidic, which is like ultra Orthodox. And I was like, why did you want to continue with that then? And he was like, because I liked the way, I liked my friends, I liked the community, I liked the traditions, I thought it was good for us, and I liked that it kind of gave me a path in life that I was, happy about. I was going to find a wife, I was going to get married, I was going to have a family, I was going to have this job. But, so, I mean, this stuff, happens on both sides, and it's fine to say that. You can be like, oh, yeah, I didn't believe, but I thought it was still constructive. That's much better than saying, yeah, I do believe in God, but I don't, and then actually you don't. Like that's not good. And it's not good to also say that you disbelieve in God if you do, but you have to first have that shared understanding, or that honest and true understanding of what the definition of theism would be, of what it means to be a theist. To believe in God. That's why I use the term theism, because to say believe in God, do you believe in God? If somebody asks me, do you believe in God? I don't know. I have experienced God firsthand, like in profound, supernatural ways, like not just like, oh yeah, I had this feeling and about, something, and I knew that it was God giving me a message, or I had this, synchronicity or something. And I do get those all the time too, just like, everybody. That doesn't mean you would think it comes from God, but we all do go get those things. And some of us attribute it to God, I think rightly so. But I did once have like a profound experience with God. And that was that, like, if you, it was as real as anything else that I've experienced. So why, just because nobody else was there doesn't mean I should disregard it. I don't have a history of having an incongruency between what I assume about, my daily life and actually what is. So, I have a history of success in my goals. So that means that I have a pretty accurate viewpoint of my world around me. Otherwise, you couldn't actually have a very repetitively consistent, and at least consistently or consistent track record of success in achieving your goals. But you have to trust your firsthand experience over what other people tell you. If you experience something and you're like, yeah, I experienced this, and somebody else has never experienced it, and they're like, yeah, you're crazy. You didn't actually have that happen. You just had a, I don't know, like a random hallucination due to nothing, because I was sober. And you can tell me that, but like, why should I trust you over me? That's like, that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, you can't live your life like that. Literally, it's impossible to make sense of your world and live your life by trusting people's secondhand information over your own firsthand experience. Just can't. No matter how odd the experience is, you just cannot do that. And but I don't believe in just believe in God. I do believe in God, but I don't just believe in God. I have experienced God. I'm aware of God firsthand through experience, like profoundly, like visually aware of God. So audibly aware of God, like that's not belief. So to say, oh, do you believe? It has already a built-in like preconception of what theism, being a theist, means. I don't, because then if somebody says, do you have faith? Are you a person of faith? Do you have faith in God? It's like, I don't have faith in God. I do have faith in God, but I don't just have faith in God. I do believe in God, but I don't just believe in God. I am aware of God. I have experienced God. So I know God. Like, that's what I would say. I know God. I'm not the only one. I'm not trying to like sit up here and be like, I know God and you do not. No, anybody can know God. And yeah, it's partially up to God, but it's also partially up to you. It's not just special people. Everybody was created. If you believe in God, everybody was intentionally created by God. So how much more special do you need to be? But it, like, these terms are not good for this discussion. I've said before on here, talking about faith, I said, I have faith. I don't have faith in God's existence, because I know. But I have faith in his like assistance. I think I said, I was like, I don't have faith in God's existence. I have faith in God's assistance, because I have to. Like, he could change his mind and not want to help me with things, and not. It's possible that God would not be, good to you, but you kind of have to have faith that he will, because, like, if he doesn't, then you're screwed anyway. So, like, you might as well just have faith that he has the best intentions for you, because if you think that he doesn't, you're screwed. You can't do anything about it either. If you believe that in his existence, then and you also believe that he doesn't have the best intentions in regards to you, then you're really screwed. Like, that just even if it's true, like, it's not a productive thing to think about. So why devote any energy to it? It would be a destructive thing to think about immediately if it was true, and there would be no reason to worry about it, because you'd be at the mercy of his, I don't know, evil actions anyways. But I don't like to even say blind faith is worse. Like, nobody has blind faith in anything, really. Like, you have faith in, if you have faith in something or someone, then it's due to, like, that perspective being built on other assumptions. I have faith every morning that my car will start. It hasn't always started. Once actually, my interview for PragerU many years ago, I don't work there anymore, but I used to. And my interview there, I went to go start my car, and it did not start. It was like the first time I think my car has ever not started. And maybe, yeah, it was the first time. Only once since then has it not started. And it was just a dead battery. But I have faith that my car will start. But it's not blind faith. It's built on the fact that, every day, for the most part, it starts. And it's also designed to start. So, like, why would I assume that it won't? If you buy a car and you've never driven it, you still assume that when you turn the car on, it's going to start, because it was designed to start. So it's not blind faith, but it is faith. You don't know. Until you experience it firsthand, you don't know it's going to start. And so you only know in hindsight that your car is going to start. But here's James Tour talking about, like, how we should teach evolution in schools still.
It's being added. So you have to account for this. So, of course, and I say exactly on my website, you shouldn't stop teaching evolution in school, but maybe what you want to do is teach universal common descent and ENCODE and orphan genes, that they're still building a body of evidence, and there's problems with this. It's not a fact yet. And that's what happens to the community, and you get isolation. And I love both of these communities, and I feel a part. But this community, the scientific community, is cutting off James Tour from scientific funding for my saying exactly what I'm saying now. And you may think yourself so tolerant and so wonderful that you would never do that. But that's exactly what the community is doing. I am coming out and saying...
Of course they are. I'm just saying from firsthand experience with this many, many times, of course, almost certainly they are. If you say that you believe in God, and it's not just I believe in a higher power, which means nothing. Like, what does that mean? Electricity. Like, what is a higher power? Is that a sentient being? Like, do you believe in a sentient being that, intentionally created the universe? That's different than saying, oh, I believe in a higher power. That's why my definition of theism is very important, because it's broad enough to include the different perspectives and scriptural traditions, but it's also specific enough to exclude anti-theism and it doesn't include the different scriptural traditions by default because it includes everything. Like, oh, I believe in a higher power. That includes everything. But it specifically states that God is a sentient being, which is what God is in any scriptural tradition, for the most part. But when James Tour is talking about like these different communities, I understand this as somebody who was raised secular Jewish, who then is also now part of the Christian community and is also now part of you could say the Orthodox, the observant, or from Jewish community. Like from means observant, and but the observant Jewish community. I went from being not a member of the observant Jewish community, and not being a Christian, not believing that Christ was the Messiah. And we're not going to talk about what that means on this stream, but we will in what Sentient Singularity theory would imply about what that means in the future, in a future episode. But to being like in both of these communities, very much so, coming from the secular Jewish community, going to the Orthodox observant Jewish community, and then also simultaneously having this Christian belief come into my life. And so I'm a part of all these communities, and just like he says he is, and I see the bickering back and forth between them that is they're arguing past each other. And also I would say I am a member of people who are involved in the scientific community, even though I'm not I don't have a PhD and I don't work at a university, but I get on here every week and I talk about scientific topics, and I also talk about theological scriptural things all the time, and it's part of my life. So I don't have any conflict actually between these communities, between the various things that define me as being in these communities in my life. There is no conflict. The conflict comes from the people in each community who are just finding reasons to argue with each other or not really understanding each other. But there is nothing that is about the defining things that make me that would define me, the attributes that would define me as being part of these communities, that is fundamentally in opposition. There's nothing. And I understand why the like frustration, because people who are anti-science or anti-scientific pursuits and like those people that's not my people. People who are anti-God, that's not really my people. People who are anti-evolution in general, like that, there's selection and change over time and growth, like those aren't my people. Like I'm not anti like that, or try not to be. Like we should all try not to be. You should focus on what you believe to be true, or what you think is true, what you know is true, but not what you think isn't true, or what you know is false, or what you believe to be false. Like focusing on that is bad. So, just it's important to navigate this every issue, but especially ones that are directly related, obviously, to theism and anti-theism, very carefully. And it is interesting. I grew up thinking you couldn't be Christian and Jewish at the same time, which is nonsense, because the founders of Christianity were Jewish. Of every single one of the apostles and Jesus himself was a Jew. In fact, you could even, we'll get into it this another time, but to be Christ-like, to be the most Christ-like would be like to be a Muslim Jew. Like that's what would be to be like the most Christ-like, probably. And that's just funny because like you would think that these are just three fundamentally opposed groups: Jews versus Christians versus Muslims. You're either Jewish or you're Christian or you're Muslim. No, they define each other. The people who exist, who are defined as being part of these communities, are defined differently. What makes you a Muslim is different than what makes you a Jew, which is different than what makes you Christian. And what makes you part of a scientific community versus what makes you part of a theistic community is also different. It's not on the same allele. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. They are just different. And you can be very involved and very interested in science, very serious about it, and also be very serious and involved in your relationship with God, and be a very serious theist. And also, you can be an evolutionary biologist and be a very serious theist and a very serious evolutionary biologist. And trying to separate the two is not what you should do. In fact, one should inform the other. That doesn't mean you go and you try and figure out how, I don't know, you take some passage in the Bible and you try and figure out exactly how you can construct a model in scientific terms that validates the, surface level interpretation of what you read in Scripture. That's not what you should do. That's disingenuous. That's not a goal of truth, but to have your belief or your faith or your knowledge of the existence that sentience is fundamental, and is the fundamental nature of existence, and that the universe was created by a single sentient being, or that we all are subject to a single sentient being that we are within. That should inform your approach to evolutionary biology, and there's no incompatibility of it. What is evolution? Let's define it. Look it up. The process by which species adapt over time in response to their changing environment. James Tour said we shouldn't stop teaching evolution in schools. I don't think we should be worried about teaching evolution or religion or politics or any of this stuff in schools. Like, I think we need to be teaching like the legal system, our the foundations of your governing documents of the country that you exist in, so that you understand your own government. You should be taught a skill based on via firsthand personal experience with it. So if you want to learn about woodworking, you should be doing woodworking. If you want to learn about Punnett squares and heritability, you should be gardening peas in on the playground, or you should be breeding goldfish in the classroom or something like that. Like, the focus should be on giving kids firsthand experience and access to information that they know is true, they don't think is true. Not just, oh, well, guess what? Like, Pluto's the 9th planet, from the sun. Oh, wait, actually, no, it's no longer a planet. Don't you know? It's like, what does that mean to anything in our lives? Like, why is that relevant? And how do you even know that? If you're not the one who made the telescope, you don't know. You think somebody else told you. I can see Mars at night, and Venus and Jupiter and sometimes Saturn, but I can't see Pluto, and not knowingly at least, and neither can you. So like, why do you need to know that it even is there? Like, unless you have a specific interest in astronomy, and therefore you're on a self-guided journey where you're putting pieces together over time, instead of just like being thrown different pieces and you're not even trying to put them together. You're just told to accept them and assume them all to be true equally. That's like nonsense. So the chat. Responding on IG about Discord if it's still something you see. Messaged on IG about the Discord. We do have a Discord, by the way. I keep forgetting to mention this. We have a Discord server for our community. All you have to do is private message me on Twitter or Instagram. I have Theory of Everyone Instagram or Tyler Marshall Goldstein Instagram. Private message me telling me you want the link to the Discord, and I will send it to you, and you can join. We have weekly live open discussions every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. So we'll have one tomorrow on anything that people want to talk about. And that goes on every week. It's very consistent, just like these streams. But you have to ask me for the link. There is no place you can find it. You have to approach me and ask me for it. And I will give it to you if you ask. There's no test, but you do have to ask. I don't just leave it out there. It changes the dynamic of who comes into the Discord. But when James Tour is talking about single origin of life, I think that I don't know what he's getting at there, because I think the single origin idea, it's consistent with sentient singularity theory, which takes it even further than just cells. That we all descended from a single cell cellular organism. We have a common ancestor. I think that that's totally consistent with theism. I believe that. So I think it's beyond that, actually. I think we descend from a single ancestor that was a sentient being that was not even a cell. You could say atoms, molecules, and even atoms. Sentient singularity theory seems to imply that atoms and molecules are sentient beings, maybe even hadrons, which is protons and neutrons. So, but this is, I don't know what he's getting at with that, though. So I don't think that the common ancestor idea is incompatible with anything. Just because it's listed in Scripture that God created the animals and the plants, and then man, that doesn't mean that wasn't through a process. You can interpret that different ways. I'm not saying which interpretation is right or wrong. I'm just saying it's Scripture, if it's true, is super literally true. It's true on multiple levels. It's not just so surface level that it lacks the depth to be able to include any processes to get from one thing, one state to the next in what is described in Scripture. I don't think you should try and prove Scripture through science either. It just doesn't. Even though I do believe in it. So this is a fascinating clip. I actually am going to look into this.
He didn't believe that gradualistic evolution worked, and he had a punctuated equilibrium model that he proposed instead, and his
Okay, so this is Gould, I believe it was. J. Gould. Not a graduate. I think it was. What is the punctuated equilibrium theory of Gould? Punctuated equilibrium. Let's see. That sounds like sentient singularity theories models. Fascinating. Okay, for instance, watch this, guys. This is kind of cool. I'm going to do more research on this, and we will talk about it in the future. But so sentient singularity theory, if you go to sentientsingularitytheory.com, and you see this model, this is a model of a single, what I call a cosmological verse, or verse. This is the mathematics of creation and the logic of creation, basically. And I will deconstruct all of this in a stream in the future. And I actually have in previous streams, but we will have a formal video going over this entire thing. But there are these periods of evolution in sentient singularity theory, and the periods are hadron, atom, molecule, cell, organism, family, basically cast then to technology, and then you get a self-simulation, and basically, which is really a replication, you get a verse creating another verse inside itself through technological quote-unquote simulation, but it's not simulation, it's reproduction. And it restarts the entire system. But going across from here, this quark to, where the label to where it says assembly of information and energy, or going from hadron label here to assembly of quarks, or going from atom label here to assembly of hadrons, or cell to assembly of molecules. Across this way is replication, or kind of like adaptation. It's the graduation. So like going from a sparrow to a crow, or from a boa constrictor even, or like a lizard to a snake. Like even that would be the same thing. It'd be graduated. First you get less and less and less and less and less and less and less legs, and then you get to primitive snakes with primitive legs like boas and pythons. My boas and pythons, they have little tiny legs just on hind legs. It's just a spur. It's one claw that they have, but then you have like king snakes and colubrids, which includes like king snakes and garter snakes and things like that. There's no spur, so they're just a little further along in this process of losing their legs. That's all graduation. Even getting from a worm in sentient singularity theory, like an earthworm. I'm not saying this is the path. This is not the path. But getting from like a worm type creature to, which would be an ancestor, to a primate, to like a chimp. Like that would be a graduated process. That's moving from here to here. You're moving within the period of organism, which is assembly of cells. You're moving within it. You haven't jumped it. But then there's a stacking process where you jump to another level, or an ascension process, you could say, which is what gets you from a cell to an organism, a single cellular organism to a multicellular organism, or a molecule, an assembly of molecules to a cell, or an assembly of cells to an organism, or etc. So, and half of these maneuver through a lineage structure, and half of them maneuver through an individual essentially. So like if you go to models and see here, atoms, cells, families, technology maneuvers through lineage structures, meaning it replicates itself, and then it's replicative, and then it maneuvers in its relationship with its succeeding and preceding structures. But then you have the individuals, the side of this that maneuvers through individuals, where you have hadrons, molecules, organisms, and castes. Essentially, it's not the best term, castes, but it's what we have currently. We'll define that later. But they maneuver in relationship with other things around them, or other beings around them. So you're an organism. If you're a male, you maneuver in relationship with a female, and then but then if you look at like things on a lineage structure, your lineage, your family unit, which is really like the holonic completed replicative unit, like a cell is able to do this. Cells replicate themselves. You don't replicate yourself. You have to bind to another human being, and then the two of you as a family unit replicate, other humans. So humans are not just replicating structures like cells. They are, at least most cells, they have to maneuver in regards to other humans, and then in a specific way, and then unify, and that structure is the replicative structure, which is the family structure. And you're within it, so like it's hard, it's not saying it's going to look the same, but it is a single structure. Atoms too are this as well. Atoms maneuver through a lineage structure. That's how different elements are formed, is, start with hydrogen and go to helium, and then et cetera, through adapting essentially to the forces that it is exposed to. So but they used to even call atoms much more commonly in conversation. The different elements, they call them species. I don't know how common it is now, but they used to. Even molecules, they used to do that, I believe. And even in like different engineering instances, so like they wouldn't say a different model of a plane, of a specific plane. It wouldn't be like an F-15 it's what model of the plane is that? It's an F-15. They'd be like, that's the F-15 is the species of plane. But they don't do that kind of thing anymore. But it made a lot of sense to do it. But this model, though, the point is, this model of sentient singularity theory's cosmological verse is graduated from here to here and punctuated from here to here. It's both. It incorporates both. So it's not an argument of, is it a punctuated equilibrium model or is it a graduated equilibrium model, which is, I think, what they're getting at with these different levels of evolution. Or it's not macroevolution versus microevolution. This would be like macroevolution, getting from an atom to a molecule, getting from a molecule to a cell, getting from a cell to a single-celled organism to a multicellular organism. These are macro jumps. But then there's change and graduated change that is happening within these periods that are separated by punctuated jumps. And then eventually you reach a point where you have to replicate the entire process. Again, you can't go any further. And there's a reason why you can't go any further past here, but we'll talk about that another day. But it's interesting that he said that, graduated versus punctuated. This sentient singularity theory implies both are true. But the hypothesis that evolutionary development is marked by isolated episodes of rapid speciation along long periods of little or no change. Now, if you look here, it kind of looks like my model as well, which is funny. But this is, like, you're going to see this pattern even within what we would call graduated, So you'd say, like, speciation of snakes versus lizards. So you have, like, within organisms, you have reptiles and you have, or you'd have, like, what would be like insects and arachnids and crustaceans within invertebrates. So you'd have, like, invertebrates, you'd have insects, arachnids, crustaceans, worms, etc. But then you'd have vertebrates, and within vertebrates you'd have birds, reptiles, mammals, etc. But then within mammals you have, like, canines and felines and weasels and whales, whatever. Then within reptiles you have snakes and lizards and turtles and tortoises and crocodilians. But then within snakes you have boas and pythons and colubrids and elapids and vipers. It's like, then within those you have the same, like, periodic manifestation, but even then they're still in a macro scale, I guess, or on a fundamental level. The difference between a viper and a elapid, or like a boa and a viper, it's not. It's still graduated, I would say, even though it is also, you could say that it's punctuated, or it appears punctuated. It's not really fundamentally punctuated, like the difference between an atom and a molecule, or like a cell and a single-celled organism and a multicellular organism. That's not that fundamental punctuation like this is, but it's still punctuated perspective. And you're going to see the same patterns manifest when you're talking about fundamental reality again and again and again. If you go to here, what is a fundamental theory? Is a recognizable, describable, predictable, and applicable pattern that occurs in all instances of supersubjective observation or objective observation, however you want to say it, and an explanation for such pattern. So you're going to see that punctuatedness pattern manifest even in instances in which it's not fundamental punctuation. It's kind of graduated punctuation, which sounds like it doesn't make sense. But I just thought that was interesting. I'm going to look more into this. This punctuated equilibrium. But what's, it says, when you look up evolution online, and it says this, it's like, evolution is the process by which species adapt over time in response to the changing in their environment. Guys, they don't even have species defined anymore. I know this because in monitor lizards, for example, you can breed two different types of monitor lizards very often together, and they will make viable hybrids. They will not be like a mule where they can't reproduce. They will make very fertile, perfectly healthy hybrids. Is that the definition of species used to be you can no longer breed. And that actually is a fundamental definition. It makes sense that that would be actually the fundamental definition of species. But we've lost that because now species means that they have different, a general phenotypic pattern that, is common to many individuals, or there's a specific amount of individuals that live in a specific location that breed together. Like there's no primary or unified definition of species. There used to be, there's a species, a type of monitor lizard called a water monitor, an Asian water monitor. An Asian water monitor, I guarantee you could breed with a different species of monitor if you chose correctly, and you'd probably get fertile offspring. I don't know of any instances in which it has happened successfully, but I bet you could do it because I've seen other types of monitors bred. So is that really a different species from like white throat monitors in Africa, even though they really are like separated completely? They don't interact, like they look totally different, they act pretty different. But then they probably could breed if you put two of them together, and those offspring would probably be fertile. But now it's not just, they used to have subspecies, many different subspecies of water monitor, okay, which is the second biggest lizard in the world. It's like a Komodo dragon almost. It's the closest thing to a Komodo dragon that you could own, just to make this more impressive to you guys. Because it sounds like I'm just talking about lizards, but big. This is a water monitor. It's massive, guys. Okay? It's close relative to the Komodo dragon. They actually make great captives and great pets for people who are prepared for them and do their research. They can be very nice and adaptable. But and they're domesticating them now. But there's different types. So there's this one from the Philippines that's gold. And then there is this one. Not that one. This one, which is black. It's basically the same thing though otherwise. And it's from a different area. And then there's this one. And it's from a different area. And these all used to be different subspecies. Now they've just made them all different species. Like those I know you can breed together because people do it all the time in captivity when they are, as they domesticate them. So look at how giant they are. I know that guy. So like we don't, if evolution is defined as this, the point is this. If evolution is defined as the process by which species, adapt over time in response to changing environment, that's evolution. I'm not saying that's false, but we need to define that. And this isn't complete either to describing the process of the logos of life or of growth of beings, materially observable beings, or animated beings, whatever you want to call them. This is not complete. And there is room for God in this process. and God, if God exists, there's room for God in this process, and it doesn't mean that this process doesn't exist. And if this process does exist, then, which I would say that it does, like, and God exists, then there's room for this process in theism. So like there is no reason to put these two things against each other at all. We need to focus on, do we know what this even means anymore? I think the original definition was great, but it means like that we would need to, the problem with the original definition of species is animals that don't breed with each other anymore, is that so many things that we call different species now, a Mojave rattlesnake and a diamondback rattlesnake, two different species, they would now be one species. And then do you define a species as animals that can no longer breed and produce? You have to be able to produce offspring that are fertile. You can't just produce a mule and say, oh, they produced an organism. No. They didn't. They produced a sterile organism. But if you can still produce fertile offspring, does it matter that you don't in the wild, but you might be able to in captivity? Like, we need to define these things, and then in order to actually have a definition of evolution that's accurate. And I know that seems like nitpicky, but it's really not. If evolution is the process by which species change over time in response to their changing environment, we need a definition of species. And you need it to be an objective definition. It can't be just an agreed upon, shared, sometimes changing definition. No, it needs to be a concretized, true, unchanging, and accurate definition of differentiation. So, like, it means they can't be able to replicate with each other, really. It can't mean, oh, they don't in the wild, because there's a mountain range in between the two, so now they're different species because there's a mountain range. No. No. What if one, because this one's on this island and this one's on this island, now they're different species? No. What happens when one, gets washed by a storm to the other island, which happens all the time? Now what? Are they now different species, or it's just a hybrid forever? Like, what? There is no objective definition of species, which means there is no real objective definition of evolution. It's just the process of change, of life changing. Okay? Like, that's true, but like, can we get it a bit more defined? But good luck trying to get people to eliminate over 95% of the species that currently we have on Earth. Like, because we just all of a sudden lump them together and we bring back subspecies, which I think was a much better model. But it's also hard because, like, there are species that we don't know if they could breed together if you tried. What if they look totally different, but and they're from totally different areas and they would never breed other than if you tried in captivity? But you would assume that they wouldn't be able to, but then one day we find out that they can. It's like, should you assume they're different species until proven that they are not? Or should you assume that they are the same species until it's proven that they aren't? Like, these are, like, science is a true science is a process of finding the truth. It is not a set of truths. It is a process of finding the truth. And, that's not even what religion is. So they're not mutually incompatible. Religion, I would argue that even the three Abrahamic traditions are not the same thing. They're not. We'll talk about that on another stream. But even still, they're not the process of finding the truth through experimentation and observation. Like, that's not what they are. And science is something that we can make much more concrete than we have it currently. People talk about pseudoscience all the time. It's like, what is how is what we're currently doing not pseudoscience across all these different fields all the time? Like, calling things, infinitely different species. Like, what is... but nobody's going to want to give up, the fact that their great grandfather was named after, that lizard, or that lizard was named after someone's great grandfather. Like, there's so much personality and human ego that comes into play in this stuff, and you have to realize that too. Like, part of the reason why species get created is because somebody wants to name an animal after themselves. So they claim that they're naming it after their father, who's deceased, who has the same last name. So we're going to call it, Varanus goldsteini, the goldstone monitor lizard. It's like, it's not named after me. It's named after my dad. Yeah, right. This is, this is a complicated environment, is my point. But we can actually make things much less pseudoscience-y and much more concrete. But it requires abandoning our current assumptions and our current customs and practices many times, even when it comes to what is, how we define speciation, which is absolutely a mess. A mess, guys. It's an incredible mess. Good luck making sense of evolution when we can't define what a species is. Like, if you're like, evolution is the process by which a organism changes. Which organism? Like, you want to track the changing of an organism, you need to identify it. And it needs to be isolated from the others. Like, concretely isolated. Not like, oh, this one's a little bit more yellow. What, then are humans different species? People have thought that before, but that's not true. Like, we can all breed with each other and produce viable offspring. Like, and there's infinite, in-betweens. That's true of all these different species and different animals too. There's just, we don't use those examples that are the in-between animals as the examples in the textbook, because why would you do that? But, speciation is about, we've made it about focusing on differences. It's not about focusing on differences. Speciation is about focusing on differentiation, fundamental differentiation. Like fundamental structural differentiation to the point of where you can't merge back together again. Like, you cannot breed a chuckwalla lizard to a king snake. Like, that is not going to happen. Those are two different species. You can't breed a boa constrictor to a king snake. That is not going to happen. But you can breed a king snake to a milk snake, or to a corn snake, or to a rat snake, and it will be fine. So what is going on? Like, these are serious issues that must simultaneously be addressed. And that's why I think we need to start a new institutions, essentially new communities that are willing to start at the very basics. And by the way, that doesn't mean that they're going to be decades or hundreds of years behind everybody else. That's not true at all. We still have observations that have been made through experimentation that we can take advantage of today. And even if you are making progress, you're going to make such rapid progress if you're starting from the right foundations and you're going about it with the right mentality, or more so closer to the right mentality than the people who are not. So you're going to leapfrog them so quickly. But you do have to start at the beginning. You can't start where they are and then build from there. If you're starting from false premises and false fundamentals, you're not going to be able to build a proper structure. Like, if you start with a lopsided foundation, you're not going to build a straight house. You need a solid foundation. You need one that's, it is fundamental. It's on the bedrock. It's not built on sand. It's not going to move because somebody wanted to change the name of something because they wanted, their name to be forever, inscribed in the list of monitor lizard species or something. And these things have impacts. I'm not just rambling about details. Like, I am, but I'm also not. Like, the core concepts that I'm getting at here in my rambling about the details are fundamental. Can you be seriously religious and seriously scientific right up until they conflict? No, there is no conflict. If you're if you're a serious theist and you're serious about science and you're serious about your theism, there is no conflict at all. Where is the conflict? I have no conflict in my theism and even in my religiosity, which is my observance of like traditions that come from a specific, scriptural tradition. There's nothing that is incompatible with my scientific pursuits at all. You can't say, oh, well, you can be a serious scientist and serious about God until they conflict. No. In order to be serious about either one, you need to be able to figure out why you're perceiving a conflict. Maybe there is a conflict and you're wrong about one of them. But like, you can't be wrong about, to say, oh, I don't believe in science or science is wrong. Science is a method of discovering and identifying the truth. Like, it's not, and it's not memorization of a bunch of things. It's like, first, you should be prioritizing firsthand understandings through experimentation and prediction and things like that. There's nothing incompatible with theism about a systematic approach to testing ideas regarding how the world works. There's nothing incompatible there. But if you have this kind of false or simplified version that is not really built on anything other than just what somebody told you about what is religion or what is belief in God, which most people call religion, which I try not to use the word religion, or this simplified false belief about what is science, where you're like, oh, Pluto isn't a planet anymore. Don't you know that's the science? Okay, how? How? Oh, because if we did include it as a planet, we'd have to include all these others, and like, why? That just makes everything kind of chaotic. Okay, so figure out a fundamental definition. Like, and then it doesn't matter whether or not you have to then include other things. It's like it was the whole thing of making Pluto not a planet was literally, it was like a retroactive avoidance almost of trying to not confront like the fact that maybe your definition is not specific enough, or it maybe it would mean more work for you. Like, that's not science. It's just not. Reminds me of when the different alligator lizards on the West Coast. Yeah, there's tons of different kinds of alligator lizards. Mine was blown when I saw hybrid marine and land iguanas on Jeff Corwin's show back in the day. Yeah, that's fascinating. The Galapagos iguanas that Charles Darwin documented as different species, land iguanas and marine iguanas. By the way, there's different populations of each of those on different islands, so they're different. Land iguanas on one island are different than land iguanas on the other, but not enough to make them different species. But then a marine iguana is a different species that occurs on the same island as this type of land iguana. But then the two also sometimes hybridize and create fertile offspring. How are these two different species? Like, what are we defining these by? Where's the change? Like, we don't even have the ability to measure it because we don't have these things properly defined. We don't have the categories that we would use to document differences and therefore measure differences defined at all. Like, not in any kind of unified and coherent way. Everybody defines it differently. In the scientific community, that is absolutely true. Anybody that tells you otherwise is false. If you look this up and you're like, definition of species. A group of living organisms consisting of similar individuals capable of exchanging genes and interbreeding. Okay. Species is the principal natural taxonomic unit, ranking below a genus and denoted by a Latin binomial, okay, Homo sapiens. A kind or sort. Okay, that isn't specific. And a group of living organisms consisting of similar individuals capable of exchanging genes, and that's not actually specific at all. The 4 different ways a species are defined. This is actually interesting, because there would be 4 according to sentient singularity theory: morphological, ecological, evolutionary, polygenetic, biological. That's more than 4. That's 5. They are reproductively isolated from other groups, meaning they cannot breed with each other, or there are barriers to breeding, like a mountain range, which that's not objective. Morphological data and implemented in dichotomous identification keys. Like, guys, they'll be like, oh, we just did the DNA study on scarlet king snakes over there. It's actually different species. Oh, the eastern green mambas, we just did the DNA study on those. Those ones to the north are a little bit more yellow, and they don't, they're isolated as far as we can tell from the ones to the south right now. And so they're now different species because there's different genetics between them. There's different genetics between me and you. Like, well, are we different species? Then it's just, there is no objectivity to this. It's been very frustrating to watch over the last 30 years of my, following, formal herpetology. I've seen so many things that were single species become multiple species, then become one species again, then become multiple species again. And it's just, literally, they're just fads. Like, it's like subspecies is a fad, and then getting rid of subspecies and just going with species is a fad. And fads should not be informing science, but they do. My mind was blown. Okay, yeah. I've been hearing recently that Sasquatch, Bigfoot have been a genetic but distinct bear species ancestor. I have no idea. I'm agnostic on the subject. Subbreed snickerdoodle. Of a dog, like dog poodle. It's funny, my wife, her dog, our dog, he is a Cavapoo. It's a poodle mixed with a Cavalier Spaniel. People argue in dog communities all the time about, like, preserve the pureness. My dog is a, and then my dog that I brought into the marriage, they're both our dogs, is a Malinois mixed with a German Shepherd, Belgian Malinois mixed with a German Shepherd. And in that community, they're like, don't hybridize the Dutch Shepherd with the Belgian Shepherd. Like, you need to preserve breed pureness. And people do this in the reptile world too. It's like, don't mix those two. Like, how do you think new dog breeds are made? And like this, it's just, and how do you think new species are made? Like this, sometimes that's how it happens. Like it's just, we have so many biases that come into this type of stuff. And if two organisms see themselves as the same and they're able to make fertile, healthy offspring, like, who are you to tell them that they're different? Like, who are you as an outsider to tell them that they're different? If they view each other as the same and they are compatible mates and they're able to have viable, healthy and fertile offspring, who are you to tell them that they're different? It's like, oh, preserve the Dutch Shepherd from the Belgian Shepherd, because why? Like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just saying, like, there's no moral fundamental difference here. Same thing with different species, like a Mojave rattlesnake breeds with like a diamondback rattlesnake, and people are like, if it happens in captivity, people freak out about it. It's like, do you know, where's the line where this never happens in the wild? Like, are these two truly different species? I don't think so. They're phenotypical, they're patterns that come from fundamental patterns of information organization that manifest in the phenotypical expressions of all species and all groups of beings that exist, including people. And you can say the races that we have, or you could look at different types of canines, and you could be like, there's the wolf phenotype and there's the fox phenotype. There's one that lives kind of solitary pair type of lifestyle, tends to be small, And then there is the larger pack animal that is more social and, like has these phenotypical traits. And you can even get into those and you'll observe the same type of pattern. You can get into humans and be like, there's the curly-haired, dark-skinned phenotype, and there's like the straight-haired, like light-skinned phenotype, like the Asian and like African phenotypes. And then there's the in-between, which is everyone else. And this pattern occurs everywhere. It's not different species. And it occurs within itself because this is all fractal. So because it comes from our own minds organizing information. But you need to have a theory of information that explains that. A theory of mind that explains that. A theory of the fundamental nature of reality. A theory of sentience that explains that. In order to have a complete theory of evolution. Or a more complete theory of evolution. Where you can explain why we see certain phenotypes that might not just be because, it was dry that year, so like we had a change in the way we looked or something. It's very complicated, but it's complicated because it's super simple, and it just requires completely reconstructing everything, which is very hard to do, and it takes, like, there's many things that have to happen for you to even be able to have the perspective that would allow you to even start to try to do that, which usually that comes from somebody who isn't very, they're not a product of the establishment system. They either didn't do well in it, or they, for some reason, excelled in it but then also turned on it. Like, was his name? Who was on Kurchai Mungal's podcast, and I recently did a stream on him. Who was where is it? His name is Wolfgang Smith. Like him, or like me, two very different people in terms of our relationship with academia. One of them has multiple PhDs and excelled in academia and in education system, and the other one did not. And ultimately, the perspective that we have on the current establishment is basically the same. But you need somebody that's not relying on and endorsing of the current system if you're going to start from scratch. Like, you just need that. So what are the limits? Fox, wolf, bear, or bear? How about moose and deer? Human and bull. According to the mythology, there was human scorpions. Too far. It sounds too deep for me to get into tonight. I'm going to have to wrap it up. But another night. We'll bring it to the Discord and we can talk about it. I don't know exactly what you're getting at, but yeah. I mean, what is a human scorpion? Is it a human or is it a scorpion? Like, what is it? I don't know what that means exactly. But anyways, Lodum, I saw Tyler drinks Bud Light, someone said. No, I don't. I don't actually drink, really. I will have like a glass of wine at a wedding or something like that. Or I will have wine at like a religious event. But I don't drink otherwise. I did in college, but I don't anymore. And I don't really like beer. I don't really like any alcohol. It like upsets my stomach. So no, I don't drink Bud Light anymore in college. You can be serious. Okay. I don't know what you would retracted Lodum, but if you have a question, go ahead and ask, because I'm going to wrap it up. But I appreciate everybody who was here. I think that is the last clip that I kind of want to get at. I think that's fine. Yeah. But the links to the two streams that we gave some commentary on tonight are linked below. I will include timestamps to this later tonight. If not tonight, then by tomorrow morning. If you want to participate in the Discord discussions that happen every week, where it's just an open call with a great group of people, and there's different channels where you can have conversations with the community, send me a private message on Instagram or Twitter, and I will send you the link. If you want to support this project monetarily, there is a Patreon, there is Super Chats, there is, I think that's pretty much it right now. But if you aren't going to support it monetarily, that is fine. The most important thing is please hit the like button if you found this valuable. Please share it with people who you think would find it interesting. And I appreciate everybody who watched and especially participated in the chat. Like, that is what gets me coming back here every week. But I will see you guys next week, and if I don't see you in the Discord tomorrow. Peace.